Lock your doors. Dim the lights. You found Night Creepypasta Rules, where the week's most terrifying rules horror tales claw their way into your reality. Tonight's compilation? It's a descent into pure dread. And believe me, there's a twist at the end of this particular nightmare that you need to witness. It will change everything. What horrors keep you awake? Share your fears in the comments below. And if you crave the thrill of the unknown, subscribe and join our Legion of the Night. Don't look away. You won't want to miss how this ends. This is a very good one. They say abandoned places are just empty spaces. They're wrong. Welcome to Dreamland, Florida, a ghost town of faded paint and broken rides, where the laughter died. But something else was born. My name is Liam Hayes, a security guard looking for quiet. But I found myself living by 3 strange rules just to survive the night. What's the creepiest place you've ever been alone after dark? Tell me in the comments below. Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to step through the gates of Dreamland, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because here, the funhouse isn't just distorted glass. It's a mirror to something else. The shift begins now. They say forgotten places gather dust. Tangible evidence of time's slow decay. But Dreamland, Florida, that sprawling skeletal monument to manufactured joy, it collected something far more sinister. Echoes of faded laughter, that faded laughter, curdled into something else in the humid stillness, and the oppressive weight of unfinished rides, frozen mid-screen. I took the night security gig there, Liam Hayes, late of the 3rd Infantry, a man trying to outrun the cacophony of his own internal battlefield. I'd figured the profound silence of a dead amusement park, its painted smiles locked in perpetual vacant grins, would be quieter than the ghosts that still marched in lockstep through my own head. My predecessor, a nervous, twitchy man named Darren Vaults, who looked like he hadn't slept soundly since the Carter administration, pressed a hefty ring of rusted keys into my palm on his last night. His eyes, though, held the weary, haunted knowledge of too many long nights spent listening to the park breathe. Along with the keys, he gave me a faded, hand-drawn map of Dreamland, its paper soft and cracked as old leather, covered in cryptic symbols and circled areas marked no-go, and finally, a creased, sweat-stained piece of notepaper. And finally, a creased, sweat-stained piece of notepaper. 3 rules, son. He'd rasped, his voice like gravel. Memorize 'em. Live by 'em. They're the only reason I'm walking out of here tonight instead of becoming another one of its permanent attractions. The colossal rusted Ferris wheel. The dream weaver groaned in the humid Florida night behind him, a dying beast sighing its last. The carousel horses, their painted smiles chipped and menacing in the gloom, seemed to follow my every move. Kevin Ramirez, the guard before Vaults, the one Vaults had reluctantly replaced, apparently thought the rule about the ghost train was just a thrilling park legend, a bit of local spook talk. His locker, Vaults had muttered, was still full of his things when they found his flashlight, battery dead, placed neatly on the cold, silent tracks of the Midnight Express. My name, once Sergeant Liam Hayes, now felt like an ill-fitting costume. The war had recarved me, leaving behind a laconic shell and a persistent tremor in my right hand. Dreamland, with its promise of profound isolation, seemed like a fitting purgatory. The 3 rules Vaults had imparted felt less like company policy, and more like articles of a very strange, very localized faith. Don't go through the Rainbow Fun Tunnel after 11 p.m. The colors in there, they change what you see. If you hear children's laughter, wear the iron mask in the office. It keeps their joy from becoming yours. When the ghost train starts running, someone needs to be taken home. Make sure it isn't you. Dreamland by day was a melancholy ruin. By night, it transformed. The Florida humidity, thick as velvet, trapped the lingering sense of stale popcorn, bubblegum, and something else. Something cloyingly sweet and metallic, like old blood mixed with cotton candy. The painted grins of oversized clowns seemed to leer from the shadows. The silence wasn't empty. It was watchful, filled with the furtive rustlings of unseen things and the groans of decaying structures settling into the soft Florida earth. My first solo patrol was an exercise in heightened senses. Every creak of a support beam, every sigh of wind through the rusted latticework of a roller coaster was a potential threat. As the ancient, oversized clock in the park's faux Victorian town square ticked laboriously towards 11 p.m., its hands jerky and uncertain, my gaze kept drifting towards the Rainbow Fun Tunnel. It was a wide, gaping maw, painted with faded, garish stripes, leading into what was once a whimsical children's ride. Falls had explicitly stated that the entire Kiddie Kingdom section where the tunnel resided had its power grid completely severed years ago. Yet, as the minute hand on the square's clock shuddered to precisely 10:59 p.m., I saw it. A faint, internal luminescence pulsed from deep within the tunnel. A weak, sickly throbbing of a color that wasn't on any rainbow I'd ever seen. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, leaving only an unsettling afterimage on my retinas and a cold knot in my stomach. Volts hadn't been exaggerated. The nights at Dreamland began to settle into a disturbing rhythm. My patrols became a grim pilgrimage through a graveyard of forgotten joys. The silence remained the loudest sound, but it was now punctuated by whispers. The wind, I told myself. Just the wind, sighing through the broken teeth of the funhouse entrance, or the rustle of palmetto fronds. But sometimes the whispers sounded articulate, beckoning. The laughter started on my third night. I was in the Wild West Frontier section, the beam of my flashlight playing over the peeling paint of the saloon facade, when I heard it. Faint at first, then clearer. Children's laughter. Not the joyful, unrestrained shrieks of a summer afternoon, but a high, thin, reedy sound, like wind chimes made of bone. It seemed to be coming from the Screaming Serpent, a massive, rusting roller coaster that snaked through the darkness, its tracks a skeletal silhouette against the humid, starless sky. The ride hadn't moved in at least a decade. Rule number 2. If you hear children's laughter, wear the iron mask in the office. It keeps their joy from becoming yours. My blood ran cold. The laughter wasn't mirthful. It was hungry. It seemed to coil around me, seep under my skin, promising a perverse, unending playtime. I forced myself to turn, to walk, then run back towards the relative sanctuary of the Central Security Office, a small cinder block building near the park's main gates. The iron mask Volts had left was a relic, heavy, cold, crudely forged. It looked like something from a medieval torture chamber. It smelled of rust, old sweat, and a faint, indefinable sweetness, like lilies left too long in water. With trembling hands, I strapped it on. The metal was shockingly cold against my skin. It was claustrophobic, the eye slits narrow, offering only a tunnel vision of the cluttered office. But as the last buckle clicked into place, the children's laughter, which had seemed to be right outside the door, receded. It didn't stop entirely, but it became distant, muffled, as if filtered through layers of cotton wool. The joy it promised now felt like a cold, sharp thing, something best kept at arm's length. I sat there in the suffocating darkness of the mask until the first hint of gray dawn, the laughter finally fading with the receding night. It was later that week I met Jayla Moon. She arrived in a battered county utility truck, claiming to be checking on some old municipal power lines that supposedly ran beneath a section of the park. She was young, sharp-eyed, with an air of no-nonsense professionalism that felt refreshingly normal in the increasingly surreal landscape of Dreamland. She asked a lot of questions about the park's history, about the persistent local rumors of disappearances, her skepticism barely concealing a keen curiosity. I kept my answers vague. I wasn't ready to share the rules or the mask. That night, reviewing the grainy footage from one of the few functioning security cameras, this one covering a section of the midway near the Screaming Serpent, I saw it just after the time I'd heard the laughter and fled for the office. A small, indistinct black shape, no bigger than a child, flickered across the screen for a fraction of a second, moving with an unnatural fluid speed. It had no discernible features, just a void in the darkness. Then it was gone. The timestamp on the recording jumped erratically for a full minute afterwards. The park was beginning to exert a strange pull on me. The lines between my waking hours and the fragmented, sweat-soaked nightmares of my PTSD were blurring. I'd find myself staring at the chipped paint of a carousel horse, lost in a reverie, only to be snapped back by the caw of a crow or the distant groan of rusting metal. The Jiangxi clock in the security office became an object of morbid fascination. Its hands would sometimes jerk backwards a few minutes, or inexplicably jump ahead, before correcting themselves with a sigh of weary gears. Small, plush toys in the abandoned game stalls would appear in different arrangements each morning, their button eyes seeming to follow me. The Rainbow Fun Tunnel, however, held a particular sinister allure, its silent promise of whatever lay within that 11 o'clock luminescence gnawed at me. The rule was clear, but the unanswered question was a persistent itch. It was during my second week that Ruby Castell appeared. She drove up to the main gate in a flashy SUV, plastered with decals for a YouTube channel called Forgotten Horrors. She was charismatic, fast-talking, with an infectious enthusiasm for the macabre. She claimed to be an urban explorer, a historian of lost places, and said Dreamland was the holy grail of abandoned amusement parks. She had a permit, surprisingly official-looking, granting her limited daytime access for filming. She seemed to know an unnerving amount about Dreamland's shadowed past, its financial troubles, the rumors of occult practices by its eccentric founder, Joseph Castell. Her distant ancestor, she admitted with a dismissive wave of her hand. A black sheep, best forgotten, but makes for good content, right? She was particularly interested in the Rainbow Fun Tunnel, citing old park blueprints that hinted at hidden chambers or unusual structural anomalies within it. That night, Ruby, having accidentally overstayed her permit, found me near Kitty Kingdom as the witching hour of 11 p.m. approached. The sickly, internal light within the tunnel was pulsing again, stronger this time. The colors more vibrant, more raw. "Come on, Liam," she'd urged, her camera already rolling. "Just a quick peek. For the fans, what's the worst that could happen in a kiddie tunnel?" Her nonchalance, her dismissal of the palpable wrongness emanating from that painted maw, was unsettling. But a part of me, the part that had faced down far more tangible horrors, was goaded. Combined with the tunnel's own hypnotic pull, I found myself stepping closer. I didn't go in, but I looked. Past the faded, grinning cartoon, animals flanking the entrance, into the swirling vortex of impossible shifting colors. For a horrifying instant, I saw myself reflected in those swirling hues, or rather, dozens of versions of myself, each one distorted, their faces stretched into silent screams, their eyes wide with a terror I could almost taste. One reflection, larger than the others, smiled back at me, a slow, predatory grin that was not my own. I recoiled, stumbling backwards, a wave of intense nausea and vertigo washing over me. The colors, they hadn't just changed what I saw. They felt like they'd tried to change me. As I fought to regain my composure, a clatter from a nearby defunct soda machine made me jump. A single, tarnished silver coin, an old Morgan dollar, by the look of it, lay in the coin return slot, solid, real, and cold to the touch. It felt like an anachronism, a piece of solid reality in an increasingly unraveling world. I pocketed it, a strange sense of protection settling over me. Vaults had mentioned leaving useful items behind. This had to be one of them. Ruby Castell, despite her unnerving enthusiasm for the park's darker aspects, proved to be a surprisingly knowledgeable, if unsettling, companion in the ensuing nights. She had copies of old park schematics, newspaper clippings about the 23 disappearances, 3 teenagers who'd broken in for a night of illicit fun and were never seen again, and even grainy photographs of Joseph Castell himself, A stern, unsmiling man with eyes that seemed to hold ancient, unsettling secrets. Ruby theorized that the park was built on some kind of geomantic fault line, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. I wasn't sure I believed her theories, but her research was undeniably thorough. Jayla Moon, the county technician, also became a more frequent, if reluctant, presence. Her initial professional skepticism had been eroded by what she was finding, or rather not finding. The power grid under Kitty Kingdom, she'd said one afternoon, her brow furrowed in frustration. It doesn't just look severed. It looks like it was never fully connected to begin with. And the lines supposedly running under the old ghost train tracks. They're on the city plans, but physically they just vanish about 50 yards from the ride, like something chewed them up. She'd heard the children's laughter too. One quiet afternoon, a faint, chilling echo drifting from the silent tracks, and the experience had clearly shaken her. The ghost train, officially named the Midnight Express, was a hulking, Gothic-style dark ride at the far, swampy end of the park. Its entrance boarded up, chained, and plastered with danger. Condemned signs. Vaults had been adamant about this one. Stay away from it, son. It ain't run in 20 years, but sometimes it still thinks it has a schedule to keep. Then, on a moonless, oppressively humid night, it happened. I was patrolling near the abandoned arcade, the air thick with the smell of mildew and phantom sugar, when I heard it. A low, mournful whistle, unmistakable, followed by the rhythmic, metallic clatter of wheels on steel tracks. Sounds that had no business being there. Sounds that were coming from the direction of the Midnight Express. My blood turned to ice. Rule number 3, when the ghost train starts running, someone needs to be taken home. Make sure it isn't you. Drawn by a horrified compulsion, I made my way towards the ride. Ruby, who I'd thought had left for the night, was already there, her camera out, a manic gleam in her eyes. Jayla, who'd been tracing one of her phantom power lines nearby, joined us, her face pale but resolute. The Midnight Express was moving, slowly, ponderously, its single, grime-streaked headlight cutting a weak yellow beam through the darkness. Its elaborately carved, coffin-shaped cars, each painted with leering skulls and skeletal figures, trundled out from the boarded-up tunnel entrance as if the barricades weren't even there. There was no sound of an engine, no hiss of steam or hydraulics, just the ghostly clatter of wheels and that mournful recurring whistle. As the first car drew level with us, a small rusted ticket dispenser built into a faux cemetery gate beside the track suddenly whirred to life with a screech of protesting gears. A single, faded, old-fashioned carnival ticket, printed on brittle, yellowed cardstock, slowly emerged. Ruby snatched it up. Incredible, she breathed, her camera zooming in. Actual paranormal manifestation. She turned the ticket over. Her smile froze. She handed it to me without a word. Printed on it, in faded Gothic script, was a single destination, Terminus, and beneath it, in a space clearly marked, passenger name, was one word, Hayes, my name. A cold, irresistible force seemed to tug at me, pulling me towards the open door of the nearest train car. It wasn't physical. It was a psychic summons, a deep, primal yearning to board, to take my designated seat, to go home. From inside the darkened car, I could almost hear faint whispers, the echo of forgotten laughter. Just as my foot was about to leave the ground, a small, childlike hand, impossibly cold, shot out from behind a cracked, fogged-up mirror on a nearby game stall. One of those distorting funhouse mirrors. Its tiny fingers scrawled a single, reversed word in the thick dust on the glass. N-O-T. Then it vanished. Ruby, for all her excitement, looked momentarily unnerved by the ghostly intervention. But the train, it was still waiting, and my name was on the ticket. The Midnight Express idled on its phantom tracks, a silent, predatory beast, its single headlight boring into the oppressive darkness. The ticket, my ticket, felt impossibly heavy in my hand, its faded ink a stark, undeniable summons. The psychic pull towards the open car was a physical ache, a deep, resonant yearning to surrender, to find whatever oblivion lay at the terminus. The whispers from within the train grew louder, more insistent, promising rest, promising an end to the endless patrol of my own haunted memories. Liam, Daunt, Jayla's voice, sharp with genuine alarm, cut through the hypnotic allure. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. That thing, it's not right. The power readings around it are impossible. Ruby Castell, however, was practically vibrating with excitement. This is it. This is the core manifestation. Her camera was inches from the train car, capturing every spectral detail. Joseph Castell wrote about this. The soul ferryman, a conduit for transitional energies. Her eyes, however, held a gleam that was less academic curiosity and more a predatory, almost possessive hunger. The puppet boy's ethereal intervention, that dusty NOT on the mirror, had been a lifeline. I fought back the train's insidious pull, planting my feet. The weight of the silver coin vaults had left feeling reassuringly solid in my pocket. Someone needs to be taken home, I rasped, the words of the third rule echoing in my mind. But it's not going to be me. With Jayla's help, and guided by a series of increasingly frantic, reversed messages scrawled by the puppet boy on dusty game consoles and fogged up windows, messages like DNRU underground, and an error carby, mirror breaker, or Maka. We found it, hidden beneath the crumbling, rat-infested remains of the old Galaxy arcade. Behind a false wall in what was once a prized redemption booth was a narrow, steep flight of stone steps, slick with mildew, leading down into an earthy-smelling darkness. The air that seeped up from below was cold, ancient, and carried the faint, cloying scent of that same lily-like sweetness I'd associated with the Iron Mask. Joseph Castell's private study, perhaps, Ruby mused, her camera already probing the darkness, or something more ceremonial. She seemed almost too eager to descend. The chamber below was circular, hewn from the damp Florida earth. Its walls covered in bizarre, interlocking symbols that seemed to writhe in the beams of our flashlights. In the center, a shallow circular depression was filled with a dark, stagnant liquid that reflected the light like polished obsidian. Around its rim were carvings depicting stylized figures, some human, some less so, engaged in what looked like a ritualistic dance. And everywhere, there was the oppressive sense of immense age, of something ancient and sentient slumbering just beneath the surface. This was no mere forgotten basement. This was a place of power, a nexus. Old, leather-bound ledgers lay open on a stone plinth, their pages filled with Joseph Castell's spidery, obsessive script. He wrote not of amusement park rides, but of Belgrin, the leech of forgotten delights, the weaver of memory's shadow. He detailed a ritual performed in 1971, a pact made to bind Belgrin to dreamland, to harness its power to draw crowds, to evoke a manufactured nostalgia that would keep the turnstiles clicking. Belgrin, it seemed, fed on strong emotions. Joy, yes, but more potently on fear, regret, and the lingering echoes of lost childhoods. In return for this patronage, Belgrin required a keeper of the threshold, an anchor soul, someone bound to the park, to its memories, to prevent the leech from wandering, from overfeeding. Joseph Castell had been the first. Subsequent keepers, the journals hinted, had been less willing. As we read, the atmosphere in dreamland above us seemed to thicken, to roil. The distant, mournful whistle of the Midnight Express sounded again, closer this time, angrier. The faint, childlike laughter we'd heard before now echoed through the park, but it was sharper, tinged with a predatory malice. The lights in the arcade flickered erratically, casting grotesque, dancing shadows. Belgrin was aware of our intrusion. He was agitated. This is insane. Jayla breathed, her scientific composure visibly cracking. He summoned a what? A memory vampire. Ruby, however, was eerily calm, almost reverent. She ran a finger over one of the symbols on the wall. Not a vampire, dear. A symbiotic entity. Misunderstood. Joseph wasn't just a showman. He was a visionary, a master of experiential engineering. She turned to us, her eyes glittering with an unnatural light. He knew that true immortality isn't found in flesh, but in memory, in being part of something eternal. It was then that the first of them appeared at the top of the stone steps. A small, dark silhouette, no taller than a child, but with an unnerving adult stillness. Then another, and another. Belgrane's children. The echoes, the shadows, their featureless faces turned towards us. Ruby, I said, my voice low and dangerous, my hand already on the heavy wrench I'd taken from Vault's old toolkit. What exactly did you come here for? She smiled, a slow unfolding of predatory delight. Why, Liam, I came to reclaim my birthright, of course. She produced a small, intricately carved wooden flute from her bag, its wood dark and ancient-looking. Joseph Castell was my great-grandfather. He understood power. He understood control. But his methods were crude. The binding frayed. The keepers became unreliable. She gestured towards the encroaching shadows. Belgrane grew restless, hungry. It needed a new anchor, a stronger one. Her gaze fixed on me, cold and appraising. You, Liam Hayes, with your war, your losses, your beautiful, fractured memories. You are a feast, a perfect conduit. The Midnight Express wasn't just a summons. It was a seasoning, a tenderizing, preparing you to become the new heart of Dreamland. You set me up. I snarled. The rules, the train. You knew. She trilled a few discordant notes on the flute, and the shadows at the top of the stairs seemed to solidify, to take on more substance. My dear Liam, I didn't just know. I amplified. I reopened pathways Joseph had let fall into disuse. I helped Belgrane remember its purpose, her forgotten horrors. Persona was gone, replaced by something far older, far more ruthless. This park, this power, it belongs to the Castell bloodline, and I intend to restore it to its former glory. But first, her smile was chilling. Belgrane requires its due. A new keeper, bound by fear and regret, to anchor it once more. And you, Liam, are the star of tonight's grand reopening. The shadows began to descend the stairs, their movements silent, inexorable, their featureless faces promising an eternity of recycled nightmares. The shadows, Belgrane's spectral children, flowed down the stone steps like a silent, inky tide, their featureless faces promising an oblivion of recycled sorrow. Ruby Castell stood at the heart of the chamber, the ancient wooden flute at her lips, her eyes glittering with a fanatic's zeal. The air thrummed with a discordant, sickening energy, the cloying scent of lilies and old blood almost overpowering. Don't you see, Liam? Ruby's voice was honeyed, persuasive, weaving through the low thrum of the flute. This isn't an ending for you. It's a new beginning. You'll be part of something eternal. A living memory, the heart that keeps Dreamland beating. He's not a memory, he's a man, Jayla yelled, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of defiance. She aimed her heavy industrial flashlight directly at the advancing shadows, its powerful beam causing them to recoil slightly, to hiss like steam on a hot griddle. But there were too many. The silver coin in my pocket felt warm, almost buzzing. The iron mask from the office. Waltz had said it. Keeps their joy from becoming yours. Belgrane fed on emotion, on memory. Perhaps these gifts from Vaults weren't just for following the rules, but for breaking the cycle. Your great-grandfather made a deal, Ruby. I said, my voice tight, as I backed towards the stone plinth holding Joseph Castell's ledgers. But deals can be broken, especially when one party doesn't play fair. One of the shadows, bolder than the rest, darted forward, its form coalescing into a grotesque parody of a laughing child. Its arms stretching, elongating, reaching for me. I swung the heavy wrench, connecting with a sickening, wet thud. The shadow shrieked, a sound like tearing silk, and dissolved into a puddle of viscous black ichor that quickly evaporated, leaving behind only that cloying, sweet scent. Ruby's flute playing faltered for a moment, her eyes narrowing, resistant. Just like Joseph wrote, the ones with strong echoes always fight the current, but the tide always wins, Liam. I needed a way to disrupt her control, to disrupt Belgren's focus, the puppet boy. His last clear message had been about a mirror breaker or maker. There were no obvious mirrors in this subterranean chamber, but the stagnant pool of black liquid in the central depression. Belgren's eye! Shyla! The pool! I yelled, an idea, desperate and half-formed, taking shape. The symbols on the wall. Do they match anything in Castell's journals? Anything about reversing the binding? While Jayla, shielded by the beam of her flashlight, frantically scanned the ancient script in the ledgers, I faced Ruby and her encroaching shadows. I pulled the iron mask from my belt loop. It was cold, heavy, a tangible piece of old-world fear. You think that antique trinket can stop what's coming? Ruby scoffed, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. It's not about stopping it, Ruby, I said, strapping the mask on, the world narrowing to the claustrophobic confines of its eye slits. The scent of rust and old sorrow filled my nostrils. But beneath it, there was a strange sense of clarity, a dulling of the emotional cacophony Belgren was trying to evoke. It's about changing the goddamn show. The mask on. The shadows seemed less distinct, their psychic pull weaker. I grabbed the heaviest of Joseph Castell's ledgers. Its leather binding cracked and brittle as Ruby raised her flute to play a particularly piercing series of notes, clearly intended to overwhelm me. I hurled the massive ledger with all my strength into the center of the dark, reflecting pool. The impact sent a shockwave through the chamber. The black liquid erupted upwards, then receded, its surface no longer still and reflective, but violently agitated, like a stormy sea. The symbols on the walls pulsed with a furious, chaotic light. Belgren, wherever its true consciousness resided, let out a howl of rage and pain, a sound that vibrated through the very stones of dreamland. Shaking dust from the low ceiling, Ruby screamed, dropping her flute as the floor beneath her buckled. The shadows around us faltered, some dissolving into wisps of oily smoke. The binding, it's unstable, Jayla shouted over the din, pointing to a passage in the journal she'd been reading. Castell wrote, a sudden violent disruption to the heart mirror. While the anchor is unseated, it could sever the primary tether. The heart mirror was the pool, and I, the designated new anchor, was very much unseated. The Midnight Express, I realized with a jolt, was the key. Not just a summons, but the mechanism for transferring the anchor. The puppet boy's final clue. Shia Koayen El Itao Kui. The key to open the final train passage. Not a physical key, but an understanding. The train needed to run to complete its journey, but it needed the right passenger. Ruby, I yelled, grabbing her arm as she tried to scramble away from the now violently bucking floor. None be your ancestor, Joseph. He was the first anchor. Where did his final passage lead? Her eyes were wide with terror, her fanatical resolve shattered. The carousel. The hidden room beneath it. Where he first called Belgren. She stammered. That was his true terminus. The carousel, the heart of Dreamland's manufactured joy, and perhaps the heart of its curse. The chamber was collapsing. Chunks of earth and stone rained down. Belgren's howls of fury and pain echoed from the agitated depths of the dark pool. its power waning but still immense, desperately seeking a new anchor. The shadows thrashed, disoriented, some attacking each other in their confusion. "We have to get to the carousel," I yelled to Jayla, pulling a dazed Ruby along. If Castell's original binding point is there, maybe we can. I don't know. Complete Belgren's cycle without a new human sacrifice. We scrambled up the crumbling stone steps and burst out into the chaotic, supernaturally charged atmosphere of the Galaxy Arcade. The park outside was a nightmare. Reeds were groaning and sparking. Carousel music played a discordant, off-key dirge, and the ghostly laughter of children was everywhere. No longer playful, but filled with a raw, primal hunger. The Midnight Express still idled on its tracks, its single headlight like a baleful eye, waiting. Guided by Ruby's terrified, disjointed directions and the distant, mournful call of the carousel's organ, we fought our way through the pandemonium. The puppet boy, now a more solid, sorrowful apparition, flickered at the edges of our vision, pointing the way, his small spectral hand urging us onward. We reached the grand carousel. It was spinning slowly, erratically, its painted horses rising and falling with a jerky, unnatural rhythm, their grins wider, more predatory than ever. In the center, beneath the ornate calliope-style organ, was a trapdoor I'd never noticed before, its edges almost invisible. "This is it," Ruby whispered, her body trembling. "This is where he began it all." As I wrenched open the trapdoor, revealing a narrow spiral staircase leading down into darkness, the Midnight Express whistle shrieked, a final, desperate summons. Belgren knew its time was running out. "Someone needs to take that train, Liam," Jayla said, her voice grim. "Someone needs to be taken home to close the loop." I looked at Ruby. Her face was a mask of terror and a dawning, horrified understanding. Her grand plans, her birthright, had crumbled into this desperate, primal struggle. She was a Castell. Belgren was her family's legacy, her family's curse. "The ticket, Ruby," I said, my voice flat, holding out the faded pasteboard with haze printed on it. "It seems there's been a change in passenger." She stared at it, then at me, then at the waiting, whistling train. The choice was stark. Become the eternal keeper, the anchor soul she had so coveted, but on Belgren's terms, not her own. Bound to the true, original terminus, or face whatever justice the mundane world might offer for her part in this. With a choked sob, she snatched the ticket. The show must go on, mustn't it?" she whispered, a ghost of her former theatricality in her voice. She turned and began to walk, then run, towards the Midnight Express, the ticket clutched in her hand. We watched as she climbed aboard. The train's whistle gave a final, triumphant shriek. Its doors hissed shut, and then slowly, majestically, the Midnight Express began to move. Not into the park, but away from it, fading into the humid Florida night, its mournful whistle receding into the distance until it was gone. As it vanished, the chaotic energy in Dreamland seemed to deflate. The ghostly laughter died. The ride shuddered to a halt. A profound, almost peaceful silence descended. Down in the chamber beneath the carousel, we found what looked like a simple stone sarcophagus. It was empty, but carved into its lid was the name, Joseph Castell. His final passage, with Ruby taking his place on the train, completing that cycle, Belgren's primary anchor to this world, its hunger for a new human keeper, seemed to have been satisfied, or at least pacified for another generation. Dreamland was eventually cordoned off, deemed structurally unsound, and an environmental hazard. Jayla Moon wrote a carefully worded report that mentioned unstable ground and potential toxic materials, omitting any mention of ancient entities or spectral trains. The story of Ruby Castell became another local legend, the vlogger who vanished, another ghost to whisper about in the dark. I left Florida, carrying the iron mask and the Morgan silver dollar as unsettling souvenirs. The war inside my head was quieter now, though not silent. I'd faced a different kind of darkness, a different kind of leech, and somehow I'd walked away. Years later, I read an article online. A small independent film company was trying to get funding to shoot a documentary about America's most haunted, defunct amusement parks. One of the locations they were scouting was a place in rural Florida called Dreamland. The article mentioned local rumors of a dedicated, if somewhat eccentric, new caretaker who had recently taken up residence on the outskirts of the property, a woman who claimed to be a distant descendant of the park's founder, and who spoke passionately about preserving its unique historical atmosphere. The cycle, it seemed, was always looking for its next encore. But this time, I knew with a chilling certainty my name wasn't on the ticket. Dreamland holds its secrets tight, guarded by shadows and the echoes of lost joy. Liam Hayes learned that some rides don't have an exit, and some games never end. The rules were a desperate guide through a terrifying, manufactured nightmare. The train has left the station, but the passengers remain. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate ticket, the twist that reveals the true, ongoing ride at Dreamland. The last few moments will make you question what it means to go home. What do you think Belgrin is? What was Joseph Castell's true pact? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the night shift at Dreamland, if the park hasn't claimed you, then you're already part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some attractions demand a very specific kind of ticket, and the fun is eternal. They say the sky is empty, but I know better. It remembers. Welcome to Flight 733, a red-eye from New Orleans to Denver, a flight I never should have taken. My name is Rhett Calhoun, a pilot haunted by his past, but I found myself navigating a nightmare governed by 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the scariest flight you've ever been on? Tell me in the comments below, and if you're brave enough to buckle up, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell, because on this flight, the destination isn't on any map. The journey begins now. They say every pilot has one flight they can't scrub from their memory, the one that etches itself onto your soul like frost on a winter window. For me, that was Skylink Flight 733, 8 years back, a mangled wreck of twisted metal and fractured recollections, leaving me the sole haunted survivor. Now, inexplicably, operations had assigned me Flight 733, a red-eye from New Orleans to Denver, a route I had no memory of ever bidding for, with a passenger manifest that felt unnervingly sparse, and a set of 3 cryptic rules pressed into my palm by a man whose eyes held the chilling stillness of an Arctic void. Always wear a silver chain when flying through fog. When cabin doors open by themselves at 30,000 feet, someone needs to step out. When you realize you've flown this countless times, this is your final chance to live. The recycled air in this aging Boeing already felt wrong, thick with the faint, metallic scent of ozone and something older. A pervasive silence broken only by the low hum of systems that seemed to be remembering another, far more catastrophic journey. My first officer on that original flight, good old Henderson, he'd always scoffed at superstitions, at the old tales about silver. His empty seat beside me now was a constant, screaming void. The New Orleans twilight bled purple and orange across the tarmac as I went through the pre-flight checks for Flight 733. My new first officer, Tasha Reynolds, was a sharp, young aviator, all keen eyes and a restless energy that felt jarringly out of sync with the leaden weight in my own gut. "Just 43 souls tonight, Captain," she commented, tapping the manifest. Ghost flight, almost. The term snagged in my mind. Luis Ortega, our lead flight attendant, was a calming presence, his movements economical and reassuring. Yet even he seemed subdued, casting quick, unreadable glances around the cabin as if sensing an invisible guest. As I settled into the familiar worn leather of the captain's seat, a man in a crisp airline technician's uniform appeared at the cockpit door. Marcus Bellamy, Senior Ground Operations. I recognized him vaguely from around the hangars. Quiet, efficient, always seeming to be there when the more Recalcitrant systems needed a firm hand, just a final diagnostic on the tertiary avionics bus. "Captain Calhoun," Bellamy said, his voice smooth, almost deferential. His eyes, though, were a flat, depthless gray, and they didn't quite meet mine. He fiddled with a panel beneath the dashboard for a moment, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. Some atmospheric anomalies reported further north. Standard preventative. He withdrew, then paused, turning back. He pressed a small cold metal box into my hand. A little something the old-timers swear by. For the unpredictable currents up there. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a simple, surprisingly heavy silver chain and a folded piece of thick, expensive-feeling paper. On it, in neat, block capitals, were the 3 rules. My skin prickled. "Some flights," Bellamy murmured, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his gaze flicking to Henderson's empty seat, had protocols beyond the manual. Then he was gone, a phantom in a Navy uniform. I stared at the rules, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. Superstition? A tasteless joke? But Bellamy's demeanor, the flight itself, 733er, the R felt less like revised and more like repeat, or requiem. With a deep, unsettling sigh, I fastened the silver chain around my neck. Its chill was immediate, a stark contrast to the humid Louisiana air. Takeoff was smooth, into an astonishingly clear night sky. Stars blazed with an unnatural intensity. Then, as we climbed through 20,000 feet, it appeared. A wall of roiling, impenetrable fog where no fog should be. A localized, malevolent weather system that hadn't been on any satellite image or meteorological report. It swallowed us whole. The cockpit lights flickered, and the silver chain against my skin grew suddenly, perceptibly, warm. The fog was an entity. It wasn't just moisture. It was cold, unnaturally so. A damp, bone-chilling presence that seemed to deaden sound and leach warmth from the cockpit. The silver chain pulsed with a faint, steady heat against my collarbone. A small, tangible ward against the encroaching chill. Tasha, beside me, shivered, rubbing her arms. "Temperature drop is way off normal parameters, Captain," she muttered, her voice tight, her usual confidence visibly frayed. Her eyes kept darting to the swirling gray soup outside the windscreen. "And my head feels like it's in a vice. You feeling this?" "Affirmative," I lied, though the silver seemed to be holding the worst of it at bay for me. I could still feel the pressure, though, an invasive mental static, like a detuned radio scratching at the edges of my thoughts, compensating for atmospheric density. A pilot's lie. Standard procedure for wildly non-standard phenomena. It was then that the radio crackled, not with a request from ATC, but with a burst of static, and then, impossibly, a single, drawn-out, mournful violin note. It hung in the air for a heartbeat, impossibly clear, achingly sad, before being swallowed again by the hiss. Tasha and I exchanged a wide-eyed glance. "What in God's name was that?" she breathed. Before I could answer, Louis's voice, strained, came over the intercom. "Captain, a small issue in the cabin. There's a young girl in seat 13A, wearing an oxygen mask, though it's not connected. I didn't have her on my initial passenger count when we boarded. 13A, the seat that, on some older aircraft, didn't officially exist. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, snaked down my spine. The instruments began their insidious dance. The master clock on the console flickered, jumped back 3 minutes, then corrected itself. The altitude display wavered, dropping 1,000 feet, then snapping back to our assigned flight level. Tasha's fingers flew over her controls, her brow furrowed in a mixture of disbelief and professional frustration. This isn't right. The system diagnostics were clean. Bellamy himself signed off. The name now felt like a lead white. Louis's voice came again, even more hesitant. "Captain," something else. "Some of the passengers, They're saying the same things, over and over, like they're stuck in a loop. Mrs. Henderson in 12XUs just asked me for a ginger ale for the third time. Exact same words. A sudden, violent image flashed behind my eyes. The sickening lurch of an uncontrolled descent. The smell of burning fuel. Henderson's face, pale and wide-eyed in the emergency lights. His mouth forming a scream I couldn't hear. It was a memory fragment from the original Flight 733. So vivid it buckled my knees if I hadn't been strapped in. The mundane click of a switch on the overhead panel had triggered it. My heart hammered. This wasn't just déjà vu. This was an echo. This was an echo. An encore. The violin. It returned, not as a single note, but as a full, sorrowful melody, weaving through the ever-present static, a phantom orchestra playing a dirge only we could hear. The tune was old, hauntingly familiar in its despair. Tasha, her face pale, managed to get a brief, stuttering satellite connection on her tablet. Her eyes widened. "That's Gloomy Sunday," she whispered, showing me the screen. The original 1930s orchestral arrangement, the one they called the Hungarian Suicide Song. She looked at me, a new, dawning horror in her eyes. There are urban legends, old pilot tales about certain routes, certain conditions. Louis's voice on the intercom was little more than a choked gasp. "Captain Calhoun, the coffee. The airline hasn't used this blend. This specific Sumatran roast. Since Skylink merged with Transcontinental 8 years ago. I remember it. It was my first month as a trainee. On Flight 733. His voice broke. The carefully constructed dam of his professionalism was crumbling. Oh God, I remember the smell. Just before. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture of impossible recurring horror. A sudden gut-wrenching lurch threw us against our harnesses. Alarms screamed through the cockpit. Stall warnings. Overspeed alerts. Contradictory and terrifying. A deep, mechanical groan, like tortured metal, resonated through the fuselage. A sound that spoke of stresses no airframe was designed to withstand. Then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. An absolute, terrifying silence descended, broken only by our ragged breathing and the faint, insistent weeping of the violin from the radio. That was, I now saw with a fresh stab of cold, definitely switched off. A single red light began to blink insistently on the main annunciator panel. L2 cabin door. Unlocked. My blood turned to ice. We were at 30,000 feet, and that light. I remembered that light from my fragmented nightmares of the original 733. It had blinked just like that, a malevolent red eye, moments before the world tore itself apart. L2 door proximity sensor is armed, Captain, Tasha said, her voice strained, her knuckles white on the yoke. Pressure differential holding. For now. But that light means the locking bolts aren't fully engaged. Could be a sensor malfunction. Could be. Could be the second rule about to play out its horrifying script. The violin music swelled, no longer sorrowful, but imbued with a strange, expectant urgency. Lois' panicked voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, the passengers are... some of them are calm. Too calm. Staring. That girl in 13, she's taken off her oxygen mask. She's smiling." Then, with a sound like a giant sigh followed by an explosive decompression, the L2 cabin door blew inwards, then was ripped from its hinges, vanishing into the shrieking, frigid blackness outside. A maelstrom of freezing air, debris, and panic engulfed the aircraft. Loose items, magazines, pillows, an unsecured service cart became deadly projectiles. The roar was deafening, a physical assault. The plane bucked and yawed violently. Through the swirling chaos in the cabin, visible through the briefly open cockpit door, I saw a terrifying tableau. passengers screaming, clutching at armrests at each other. And from the gaping rectangular wound in the fuselage, a vortex of roiling black mist, colder than the surrounding air, seemed to pour into the aircraft, not out. It swirled with impossible speed, and within its depths, I saw them, fleeting, contorted faces, pale and ephemeral, their eyes wide with an ancient terror. The faces from my nightmares, the faces of Flight 733's Lost. Tasha, driven by a pilot's instinct to assess and document, unbuckled and lurched towards the cockpit door, her phone already in her hand, trying to film the impossible. "I have to get this. Proof!" she yelled over the din. "Tasha, no!" I roared, but it was too late. As she reached the doorway, a tendril of that black spectral mist, distinct from the physical fog, lashed out from the chaos of the open L2 door. It was impossibly fast, unnervingly deliberate. It wrapped around her arm, and her scream was cut short as she was yanked, with horrifying force, towards the gaping hole. Louis, bless his terrified brave soul, lunged from the galley, grabbing her other arm. I fought against the violent G-forces, trying to regain some semblance of control over the aircraft, my eyes fixed on the unfolding horror. For a heart-stopping moment, it was a grotesque tug-of-war at 30,000 feet, Louis and a spectral entity battling for Tasha's life. Then, the mist pulsed, a deeper blackness within it. Tasha went limp. The tendril retracted, taking her with it, not out into the void, but into the swirling, multifaceted darkness that now seemed to fill the area around the breached doorway. She simply vanished. One moment there, the next, gone as if she'd never existed. The mist itself then seemed to dissipate, sucked back out, or perhaps absorbed into the very fabric of the plane. The L2 door warning light went out. The roaring wind subsided, replaced by an eerie whistling quiet around the now sealed, impossibly sealed, as if it had never opened, doorway. The pressure stabilized. Louis stumbled back into the galley, his face a mask of utter devastation and disbelief. She's gone, Captain. It took her. But the door, it's closed. How is it closed? I had no answers. Only the cold, brutal confirmation of the second rule. Someone had stepped out, or been taken. The silver chain around my neck felt like it was burning into my skin. And through the cockpit speakers, no longer the radio, but directly, as if whispered in my ear, came a child's voice, clear and cold. "The sky has made its choice, Captain. One seat is now empty, for now." It was the voice of the girl from 13. The impossible closure of the L2 door. Tasha's inexplicable vanishing. These were not malfunctions. They were pronouncements. The rules of this spectral sky were absolute. Louis, when he finally staggered back into the cockpit, his face the color of old parchment, was a broken man. He kept murmuring about Tasha, about the faces in the mist, about the smell of ozone, and something else. Something like burnt sugar and despair. "It's the same, Captain," he whispered, his eyes hollow. Just like before, the lights, the sounds, even some of the passengers. That man in 7B, the one who keeps asking for a bourbon. He was on 733. I served him that same bourbon moments before we fell. His voice cracked. "We're flying a ghost." The temporal distortions escalated. The cockpit clock spun wildly, then settled on a time hours behind, then lurched forward. Outside, the fog writhed, and within its depths I saw not just faces, but entire scenes play out. Brief, horrifying vignettes of other doomed flights, other eras, all trapped within Azrakal's domain. I saw a World War II bomber, riddled with flak, its crew frozen in attitudes of terror. I saw a small prop plane, lost in a blizzard, its pilot slumped over the controls. And then, with chilling clarity, I saw the cockpit of the original Flight 733. Henderson beside me, his face a mask of primal fear as the ground rushed up to meet us. My own reflection stared back from the console screen, younger, terrified, mouthing words I couldn't hear. The girl from 13, Mary Alice, her voice now a chillingly calm presence in my headset, spoke again. The sky remembers all its children, Captain. It gathers them. It wants its due for safe passage. Someone always has to pay the toll. Who will it be this time? Will you offer another? Her words were laced with an ancient predatory patience, a desperate idea, born of sheer terror and a pilot's ingrained need to understand system failures, took hold. The black box, the cockpit voice recorder, and flight data recorder. If this flight was an echo, a repetition, then perhaps Lewis, I said, my voice hoarse. Help me access the CVR housing. There's a manual override panel near the aft bulkhead. We need to see what this plane thinks it's been doing. It was a long shot, a breach of every protocol, but protocol had clearly vacated this aircraft, while Luis, moving like a man in a dream, fumbled with a maintenance toolkit. Bellamy's voice, smooth and chillingly familiar, oozed from the main speakers, not the comms. It was as if he were standing right behind me. Looking for answers in the machine, Captain Calhoun? The machine only knows what it's told, what I've told it. The cockpit door slid open, though no one had touched the controls. Marcus Bellamy stood there, no longer in a technician's uniform, but in a Skylink pilot's uniform, identical to mine. His eyes, though, were the same. Flat, gray, and filled with a cold, ancient light. The silver chain I wore seared my skin. It's a beautiful loop, isn't it? Bellamy said, stepping into the cockpit. Tasha's empty seat seeming to welcome him. Perfectly engineered. 8 years I've waited for you to be ready for this command performance, Rhett. 8 years since I made my own choice. In the screaming dark, a 733 tore itself apart. You were on that flight? I gasped, the final horrifying piece clicking into place. Oh, it was more than on it, Rhett. I survived it, just like you. Azrakal is a discerning collector. It prefers a willing exchange. I offered it my service, my expertise in navigating these little dramas, in exchange for my life. And now, my service is almost complete. All it needs is a new shepherd for this particular flock. Someone with your unique connection, your profound guilt. He smiled, a terrible, knowing smile. That's you, Rhett. He gestured to the CVR panel, which Louise, with a choked cry, had finally managed to pry open. It wasn't the standard orange box. It was older, darker, and wires, thin as spider silk, snaked from it, disappearing into the plane's infrastructure, glowing with a faint, malevolent pulse. It was Bellamy's chip Duganan Albim OGP, Thai Jan, his anchor for this recurring nightmare. Go on, Bellamy urged. Listen to your past, Rhett, or your future. It all blurs up here. With trembling hands, I activated the playback. Not one recording, but layers upon layers. My own voice, strained, terrified, repeating phrases, warnings, screams. And then, chillingly clear, my voice saying, "The fog, it's alive. I understand now. This is my final chance to live." Rule number 3, spoken in my own voice. From a flight I had no conscious memory of, yet one I was undeniably living. As Rakel's presence slammed into us, the fog outside the cockpit windows wasn't just fog anymore. It was a writhing canvas of souls. The faces of Flight 733's lost, their eyes accusing, their mouths open in silent screams. The violin music reached a deafening, insane crescendo. The plane, now completely off any real-world course, plunged through a spectral thunderstorm, lightning illuminating the tormented faces in the clouds, the entire airframe groaning as if it were being torn apart by invisible titans. "Tasha!" I choked out, remembering her sudden disappearance. Bellamy waved a dismissive hand, a loose end. She was becoming too observant, as Rackle dislikes complications to the narrative. You, however, Rhett, you are the star. This ends now, Bellamy, I snarled, my hand instinctively closing around the heavy silver chain at my neck. It was more than a piece of metal. It was the only thing that felt real, a focal point against the swirling insanity. Bellamy chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Oh, it will end, Rhett, one way or another. Azrakel is patient, but its hunger grows. Feel it? The sky itself is unmaking us. But there's a door, you know. A way out of the storm, out of the pain. He gestured vaguely towards the windscreen, where the ghostly faces swirled. Step out. Embrace it. It's not death, not really. It's continuation. You become part of the sky, part of the song. You end this torment for yourself, and for all those poor souls trapped in your echo. He leaned closer, his breath like ice and old tombs. It's a kind of peace, Rhett. I was offered it. I chose differently. But you can be free. You can be free. Luis, who had been slumped against the bulkhead, his eyes wide and vacant, suddenly twitched. A flicker of his old self returned. The silver, he gasped, his voice a thread. On 733, Henderson, he had a silver flask. Just before we hit, he threw it at something in the fog. There was a scream. Not human. His eyes unfocused again, but the fragment hung in the air. Silver wasn't just a passive ward. It could be a weapon. Mary Alice's voice, now less child, more ancient entity, filled the cockpit, seeming to emanate from the very air around us. The final chance, Captain, is not merely to live, but to choose the nature of your sky. The pattern craves completion, but patterns can be broken if one is willing to rewrite the song with a new, discordant note. Was that a hint? A loophole? Or just another layer of Azrakel's cruel game? Bellamy watched me, his smile unwavering. She speaks in riddles, Rhett. The truth is simple. Your guilt for Flight 733, for Henderson, for all of them. You can lay it down. Let the sky take it. Let me finally be free of this cursed pact. Someone must captain this ghost ship. Why not the man who started its voyage? He was twisting the knife, using my own survivor's guilt against me. The plane gave a particularly violent lurch, throwing us against our straps. Warning lights flashed like a manic Christmas display. The spectral storm outside intensified, lightning striking impossibly close. The sound like the cracking of giant bones. Azrakel was losing patience. Time to choose, Captain, Bellamy hissed, his eyes glowing faintly with reflected spectral light. The door is always open for those who know how to knock. He meant a literal door, an escape hatch, a final, fatal step. Flight 733 was a journey through the impossible. Rhett Calhoun learned that some skies demand a terrifying toll. The rules were a desperate guide through a pattern of recurring horror. The loop was broken, but the echoes remain. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the final chilling transmission, the twist that reveals the true, ongoing nature of Azrakel's domain. The last few moments will make you look differently at the clouds. What do you think Azrakel is? What was Marcus Bellamy's ultimate goal? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the storm, if the sky hasn't claimed you, then you're already a part of our crew. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some flights, they never truly land. And the sky is always hungry. The a choice wasn't a choice. It was a sentence. Step out and become another of Azrakel's trapped whispers, freeing Bellamy to... what? Find another victim? Or simply fade away? Is debt paid? Or fight and risk a far more terrible dissolution? Luis's fragmented memory of Henderson's silver flask, Mary Alice's cryptic words about a discordant note. They circled in my mind, battling the crushing despair. Rule 2. Someone needs to step out, Bellamy assumed it meant a person, a soul. But what if someone, or something, else could fulfill that? The CVR, Bellamy's cursed anchor, pulsed with that unholy light. It was the heart of this spectral engine. "You're right, Bellamy," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Someone does need to step out." I unbuckled my harness. A flicker of triumph crossed Bellamy's face. "Wise decision, Rhett. The sky awaits its shepherd." But I wasn't moving towards an escape hatch. I lunged for the exposed CVR. The silver chain in my hand held taut, like a garrote. Bellamy, realizing my intent, roared in fury and dived for me. "No, you fool! You'll destroy us all! The pattern must be respected!" We grappled in the confines of the heaving cockpit. A desperate, brutal struggle. He was unnaturally strong, fueled by Azrakel's power, his fingers like iron claws. But I had the fury of a man with nothing left to lose, and the cold weight of the silver. The violin music shrieked. The faces in the fog pressed against the windscreen, their silent screams a symphony of torment. With a desperate surge, I slammed the taut silver chain against the glowing, wired heart of Bellamy's device. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. A blinding flash of silver blue light erupted from the CVR, accompanied by a sound that was not a sound, but a deafening, soul-tearing absence of it. A void of silence that swallowed even Azrakel's chorus. Bellamy shrieked, a high, thin sound of pure agony, his form flickering, becoming translucent, as if the unholy energy that sustained him was being violently ripped away. The silver chain in my hand glowed white-hot, searing my flesh, but I held on. The spectral storm outside didn't just stop. It shattered. The ghostly faces dissolved into wisps of nothingness. The oppressive fog vanished as if it had never been, revealing a real, turbulent, pre-dawn sky. The plane, freed from Azrakel's grip, bucked and plunged. Now just a critically damaged aircraft following out of the sky, not a haunted relic. Bellamy was a fading outline, his voice a dying whisper. The cycle, broken, but the sky always remembers. Then he was gone, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and bitter regret. I fought for control, Louis. Jolted into a semblance of shocked awareness, fumbling to help. The CVR was a molten, smoking ruin. The violin was silent. We were battered, broken, but impossibly, we were flying in a real sky, albeit downwards. I don't remember much of the crash landing. A stretch of desolate salt flats in Nevada. A screaming, tearing symphony of metal. Then darkness. When I woke, it was to the blessed mundane sound of rescue sirens. Louis was alive, babbling incoherently. A few passengers, those who weren't direct echoes of the lost, had survived, dazed and injured. Tasha Reynolds and Marcus Bellamy were listed as missing, presumed lost at some point during the unexplained catastrophic systems failure in flight. Officially, Flight 733 was a miracle of survival, a testament to pilot skill in the face of an unprecedented series of malfunctions. Unofficially, in the hushed corridors of the NTSB, it was a flight of whispers and redacted reports. I never flew again. The silver chain, now tarnished and bearing the faint imprint of my seared flesh, never leaves my neck. I live quietly far from airports, far from mountains that scrape the upper atmosphere. But sometimes, on a clear, cold night, when the wind sighs just right, I hear a faint, impossibly distant violin melody. And sometimes, a wisp of fog will roll in from nowhere, clinging to my window pane. Even when the rest of the sky is clear, the sky always remembers. And sometimes, even now, I feel its cold, patient gaze, and I know that Azrakel is still out there, tending its flock, waiting for another lost flight, another shepherd. The loop might be broken for me, but the song of the sky, ancient and hungry, never truly ends. Some places are forgotten, others are cursed. Welcome to Moonshade Circus, where the greatest show on Earth died decades ago. But the performance never truly ended. My name is Cole, a detective chasing a missing person. But I found myself in an arena where the performers aren't just ghosts. I was given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest place you've ever visited? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to step under the big top after dark, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because here the audience is always watching. Some cases etch themselves onto your soul with invisible ink. Whispers that coil around you in the suffocating silence of 3 a.m. Finding Marina Vale already felt like one of those before I'd even logged the first mile. I was hired to drag her back from the Moonshade Circus, a name that tasted like rust and regret on the tongues of Redwater locals. A place infamous for swallowing its entire audience and troupe whole after one final, accursed performance decades ago. Before my boots even crunched on the weed-choked gravel leading to its tattered, faded big top, a hulking, stooped figure, more shadow than man, pressed a grimy, folded note into my hand with 3 crudely scrawled rules for, as it put it, staying off the bill. Don't sit in seat number 9 in the front row. If lions roar from empty cages, throw raw meat inside. If the tarot reader offers you a reading, accept the fate revealed. The air here hung thick and cloying, a nauseating perfume of stale popcorn, damp sawdust, and something else, a faint, sweet, coppery tang, like old, forgotten blood, the profound silence broken only by the mournful rhythmic creak of an empty trapeze swaying in a breeze that never seemed to reach the ground. My predecessor, the last poor bastard of a pie to sniff around Moonshade's secrets. They say he saw Madame Eloise and didn't much care for the cards she dealt. They never found enough of him left to fill a shoebox. The main tent sagged like a dying beast. Its once vibrant stripes faded to mournful pastels. Peeling paint curled from the ornate ticket booth, its window a dark, vacant eye. I pushed open a creaking service flap, the smell intensifying, now with an added note of animal musk and something acrid, like fear itself had a scent. The silence inside was a physical presence. Dust mortis danced in the slivers of weak sunlight lancing through tears in the canvas. Rows upon rows of empty, splintered wooden benches curved towards a circular stage, its surface scarred and stained. I took a few steps in, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the vast, dead space. Instinctively, I found myself near the front row, scanning. Seat number 9. It looked no different from the others, perhaps a little more weathered. I considered sitting for a moment, just to get a lay of the land, but a sudden intense wave of dizzying nausea, a prickling dread that started in my gut and crawled up my spine, made me recoil. The air around that specific seat felt colder, heavy. A connoisseur of decay, are we, Detective Cole? The voice, smooth as aged whiskey, startlingly close, made me jump. A man emerged from the shadows beneath the bleachers, impeccably dressed in a slightly too large, old-fashioned ringmaster's coat. Though the velvet was threadbare, the gold braid tarnished. He was tall, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that held a theatrical, mournful sparkle. Felix Grinwald. He'd introduced himself over a crackling phone line as the custodian of Moonshade's lingering echoes. Mr. Grinwald, I acknowledged, my hand instinctively going to the reassuring weight of my .38 under my jacket. Just getting acquainted with the scene. Ah, yes. The scene of so many grand finales, he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He gestured expansively at the decaying splendor. Marina Vale, a spirited girl, drawn to the romance of the grease paint, I imagine. She was here, briefly, like a moth to a dying flame. His answers were silk woven with evasion. And then I pressed. And then detective. Grinwald sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across a grave. The curtain fell, as it always does at Moonshade. She simply took her bow and exited stage left, into the grand mystery. He offered no more. From somewhere high in the rigging, a rope creaked, a slow, deliberate sound, like a sigh from the circus itself. Felix Grinwald's gaze flickered upwards for a moment, a shadow passing through those theatrically sad eyes. Moonshade, he murmured, his voice dropping, has always had its particular traditions, detective. One's best respected if one wishes to enjoy the show and still be around for the reviews. My investigation began where Marina's supposed fascination did. The periphery of the circus grounds. The forgotten corners where the everyday world bled into Moonshade's decaying illusion. The local Redwater police had been unhelpful. That place is bad ground, Cole, the grizzled sheriff had warned, his face pale. Some doors are best left unopened. The Vale family's money had bought my services, not necessarily local cooperation. I found the animal enclosures first. A row of rusted barred wagons half swallowed by thorny vines. The air here was rank with the phantom scent of unclean straw and wild beasts, though it had clearly been decades since any living creature had been caged within. Most were empty, their floors thick with leaf litter and debris. Then I heard it, a low guttural growl, vibrating through the very earth, followed by a deafening, full-throated roar that echoed off the silent tents. It was unmistakably a lion, powerful, enraged. It came from the largest wagon, the one with Sultan, king of the beasts, still faintly stenciled on its faded paintwork. The cage was patently empty, its door bolted shut with a rusted padlock the size of my fist. Rule number 2, if lions roar from empty cages, throw raw meat inside. My gut churned. This was insane, but Grinwald's parting words, the weight of this place. I found a half-rotted insulated cooler tucked under a pile of canvas, as if left there by a careless stagehand. Inside, wrapped in stained butcher paper, were several large, disturbingly fresh-looking cuts of raw red meat. The chill of it was unnatural against my fingers. With a deep breath that tasted of dust and rising panic, I unlatched the paper, my hand shaking, and hurled a hefty stake through a gap in the rusted bars. The roaring stopped, cut off abruptly. It was replaced by a series of wet, tearing, crunching sounds from within the empty cage. My stomach heaved. I backed away, not wanting to see whatever it was. Later, steeling myself, I returned. The meat was gone. The cage was still sealed tight, but etched into the thick rust on the inside of the bars, fresh and gleaming as if gouged by immense non-feline claws, were 3 deep, parallel cylinders. My flashlight beam trembled. I sought out Jenny King next. I'd been told she was one of the few long-term residents, if one could call squatting in a condemned trailer on the circus's edge residing. She was a woman in her 30s, her face etched with a weary sadness that made her look older. A pronounced limp marred her once graceful movements. She was mending a tattered sequined costume in the dim light of her trailer when I found her. "Looking for the girl, Marina?" she asked, her voice raspy, not meeting my eyes. "Lots of folks come looking. Not many leave with what they came for." She offered little, her words wrapped in layers of bitterness and fear. "This ain't just a circus, detective. It's a performance, and it never, ever ends. The Jester makes sure of that. The Crimson Jester." The name was a venomous whisper. As I left her, the distant, discordant strains of a calliope organ started up from the direction of the main tent. A jaunty, horrifying tune played on out-of-key pipes. No one was near it. I'd checked. The music seemed to skip and stutter, like a broken record, before winding down with a wheezing sigh. In the rapidly fading daylight, the shadows cast by the striped tents seemed to lengthen and twist, forming grotesque, capering figures that danced just at the edge of my vision. This place was not just abandoned. It was actively, malevolently waiting. Marina Vala wasn't just a runaway with a penchant for the dramatic. She was an obsessive. I found her nest in what must have been a disused acrobat's dressing room, tucked away behind the horse stables. A mildewed mattress, energy bar wrappers, and a collection of sketchbooks. The drawings were unsettling. Detailed renderings of the Moonshade Circus, not as it was, but as it might have been in some fevered dream. Jesters with blood-red smiles, acrobats with too many limbs, an audience of skeletal figures in decaying finery. Interspersed were poetic fragments, dark and yearning, about an eternal stage, a performance beyond life. She wasn't just visiting, she was auditioning. A small leather-bound diary was tucked beneath the mattress. Her entry started with a thrill-seeker's excitement, then shifted. She wrote of whispers in the canvas, of eyes in the darkness, of feeling a powerful presence that promised her a starring role. The last entry, dated just before her official disappearance. The jester sees me. He knows my desire. The audition is tonight. I will not be an understudy. Later that evening, as I was sifting through a pile of rotting playbills in the main office, a cramped, dusty room that still smelled faintly of Grinwald's cloying cologne. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air snaked down my spine. A woman stood in the doorway, wreathed in shadows. Eloise Renner. Her eyes were covered by a thick, black silk scarf, embroidered with silver spirals. She was ageless, her voice a low, melodic lilt. The detective seeks answers where only echoes reside, she intoned, stepping further into the room. A small, velvet-wrapped bundle was in her hands. The threads of fate are tangled here, caught in the jester's web. Perhaps the cards can illuminate your path, or your ending. Rule number 3. If the tarot reader offers you a reading, accept the fate revealed. My heart hammered against my ribs. Logic screamed at me to walk away, to dismiss this as more circus theatrics. But the weight of the previous rules, the claw marks, the phantom music. "All right, Madame Eloise," I said, my voice drearier than I intended. "Deal me in." She smiled, a slow, knowing expression, and unwrapped the cards. They were ancient, their images faded and disturbing. She laid them out on the dusty desk with practiced, unnervingly certain movements. The hanged man, the tower, struck by crimson lightning, the moon with a leering, jester-like face, and finally, the fool. But this fool was dressed in a jester's motley of blood, red and funeral black, one foot stepping blithely off a precipice into an abyss filled with grinning, shadowy faces, a path of revelation and ruin. "Detective," Eloise murmured. "You chase a shadow that wishes to be caught by the darkness. One among you wears a mask of sorrow to hide a puppet's strings. Felix, and your own fate. Ah, it dances on the jester's thread. You may find what you seek, but the price is to join the eternal cast." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffused with a chilling finality. When I reached into my jacket pocket later for my notepad, my fingers brushed against a stiff piece of card. It was the fool, the crimson jester, from her deck. Marina's diary had mentioned communicating with someone inside Moonshade, someone who understood the poetry of the shadows. Was it Eloise, or someone far more sinister? Sleep offered no escape, only a parade of disjointed, circus-themed nightmares. By morning, my skepticism was a tattered flag, battered by a relentless barrage of the impossible. The very air of Moonshade felt charged, expectant. I heard it more clearly now. Faint, disembodied applause from the empty big top when I walked past, as if an unseen audience was appreciating some silent, macabre performance. A cold breath would sometimes ghost across the back of my neck when I was alone in one of the rotten tents, followed by a faint, childish giggle that would vanish as soon as I turned. Props in the storage areas, a unicycle, a set of juggling pins, would be subtly rearranged overnight, moved by invisible stagehands. My focus sharpened on Felix Grinwald. His explanations were too polished, his sorrow too theatrical. He knew more, far more than he let on. Toad, the hulking, silent groundskeeper, seemed to be my only reluctant ally. One morning, I found a crude drawing scrawled in the dust outside my borrowed, dilapidated trailer. A stick figure with a top hat, Felix, leading a smaller figure, Marina, towards a stylized drawing of the main tent, but with a dark, ominous hole drawn beneath its stage. Following that silent clue, I found what must have been Felix's old, abandoned office, tucked away in a series of interconnected wagons that had once housed the circus's administrative staff. It was a shrine to decay, but amidst the moldering ledgers and rusted filing cabinets, I found a locked strongbox. Inside, beneath a pile of yellowed contracts and faded photographs of performers long dead, was a slim file. Its label: Moonshade Investigation, Confidential. Investigator, F. Grinwald. My blood ran cold. The file contained newspaper clippings from 40 years prior, detailing the original mass disappearance at Moonshade, and Felix's own meticulously typed notes. His early entries were logical, precise, the observations of a keen detective. Then, they began to unravel. He wrote of unnatural phenomena, of feeling watched by the canvas itself, of a sentient malice within the grounds. His handwriting grew erratic, his theories wilder, speaking of an ancient entity and a performance that demands sacrifice. The last entry was a single, chilling sentence. The jester has offered me a role. The curtain rises on a new act. I will direct. I was still reeling from this when Felix himself appeared in the doorway of the cramped wagon, his expression unreadable. Finding inspiration in the archives, Detective Cole? He asked, his voice smooth, but with an edge I hadn't noticed before. Something like that, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Your predecessor, Grinwald, he seemed to have some interesting theories. Felix smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips. Ah, yes. Poor Felix. He became rather enamored with Moonshade's mythology. Let it consume him, I'm afraid. He took a step closer. The air grew colder. One has to be careful, Detective. Sometimes, when you stare too long into the grease paint stares back. Care for a private tour of the understage. Some of our most memorable acts originated there. He gestured towards the main tent. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. And for a fleeting, terrifying moment, I saw not Felix Grinwald, the mournful custodian, but a different face superimposed over his. A flash of white grease paint, a blood-red grinning rictus, the jester. In his other hand, almost hidden behind his back, he held a small antique child's jack-in-the-box. Its painted jester face eerily similar to the one on my tarot card. He wound its tiny crank, and a tinny, discordant version of Pop Goes the Weasel began to play, each note a chilling counterpoint to the growing horror in my chest. He was testing me. And the show, I realized with a sickening lurch, was about to truly begin. Felix Grinwald's invitation, or rather, his command, hung in the frigid air of the cramped office wagon. The tinny, discordant notes of Pop Goes the Weasel from the jack-in-the-box he held seemed to drill directly into my skull, a grotesque overture to a descent I knew I couldn't refuse. His eyes, no longer holding any pretense of sorrowful charm, glittered with a cold, ancient amusement. The brief, superimposed image of the jester's grinning rictus had burned itself onto my retinas. This was no longer an investigation. It was an abduction into the heart of a waking nightmare. The understage holds many secrets. Detective. Felix purred, his voice now imbued with a chilling resonance that seemed to echo from a place far deeper than his own chest. The true foundations of Moonshade, where the magic is made. He turned, a silent, imperious gesture for me to follow. There was no choice. To refuse now would be to invite an immediate, and likely far more gruesome, end. He led me from the dusty administrative wagons, through the eerie, silent midway, with its skeletal rides and boarded-up game booths, towards the looming presence of the main tent. The very canvas seemed to breathe, to pulse with a faint internal luminescence, the faded stripes now appearing like veins on diseased skin. The oppressive silence was broken only by our footsteps, and the relentless, maddening tune from the jack-in-the-box. Instead of entering through the main audience flaps, Felix guided me around to a less conspicuous moldering service entrance near the back. He produced an ornate, tarnished brass key and unlocked a heavy, reinforced door I hadn't noticed before. Beyond it, a narrow stone staircase spiraled downwards into a damp, cloying darkness. The air that wafted up was thick with the smell of wet earth, decay, and that same sweet coppery tang I'd first noticed, the scent of old blood, now almost overwhelming. "After you, Detective Cole," Felix said, his smile a rictus in the dim light filtering from outside. The pre-show is about to begin. The staircase descended further than I thought possible, as if we were entering the very bowels of the earth beneath the circus. The walls were slick with moisture, and strange phosphorescent fungi clung to the stones, casting an eerie, corpse-light glow. The sounds of the surface world faded, replaced by a low, rhythmic thrumming, like a colossal, sleeping heartbeat, and faint, distant whispers that seemed to slither through the rock. The stairs opened into a vast, cavernous space. It was a labyrinth of rough-hewn tunnels, vaulted chambers, and forgotten storage areas, all existing in a state of advanced decay, yet disturbingly alive. Chains hung from the low ceilings, nectarae ending in rusted manacles. Strange, unsettling props lay scattered about, oversized puppet heads with vacant, staring eyes, distorted mirrors that reflected grotesque, elongated versions of myself. A child's rocking horse, rocking gently on its own, its painted smile fixed and manic. This, Felix announced, his voice echoing unnaturally, is where the true artistry of Moonshade is born, where the raw material is shaped. And then, the illusions began, not subtle tricks of light and shadow, but full-blown, terrifyingly real manifestations. The walls seemed to writhe, the stone momentarily taking on the texture of stretched canvas, painted with leering, jeering faces. Phantom performers flickered into existence, a ghostly acrobat tumbling from the shadows, her limbs bending at impossible angles, a fire eater whose flames burned cold and black, consuming the very light around him, a troupe of clowns, their faces painted in rictuses of silent, unending agony, their eyes burning with a malevolent intelligence, their movements jerky and puppet-like. They didn't interact with us directly, but performed their grotesque parodies of circus acts just for us, their spectral audience of two. I saw them then, the true audience of Moonshade, seated on crude stone ledges carved into the walls of a larger chamber we entered, were dozens of figures, some skeletal, some disturbingly preserved, all dressed in decaying finery from decades past. Their eye sockets were dark and empty, yet I felt their collective, chilling gaze upon me. Disembodied applause, dry and brittle like rustling bones, echoed through the chamber. And it was here, amidst this gallery of the damned, that I found Marina Vale. She stood on a raised dais at the far end of the chamber, not a prisoner, but a focal point. She was dressed in a bizarre, theatrical costume pieced together from tattered silks and tarnished sequins, her face painted with stark, dramatic makeup. Her eyes, when they met mine, shone with an unnatural, feverish light. There was no fear in them, only a chilling, ecstatic fervor. "Detective Cole," she said, her voice a strange, lilting sing-song. "You made it to the command performance. I knew you would. The jester always gets his audience." "Marina," I managed, my voice hoarse. "What is this? What have they done to you?" She laughed, a high, brittle sound that held no mirth. "Done to me? Oh, detective, they've liberated me. I'm no longer just Marina Vale, the bored little rich girl. I am La Fantasma, the star of the penumbra. I have a role now, an eternal spotlight." She gestured to the spectral audience. "They adore me." Felix stepped forward, placing a proprietary hand on Marina's shoulder. His smile was that of a proud, if deeply corrupt, mentor. "You see, detective, she understands. She has embraced the artistry." The jester recognized her talent, her hunger. He turned his gaze fully on me, the amusement gone, replaced by a cold, appraising look. "And now, he wishes to see what role you might play in our little troupe. Every show needs fresh blood, fresh faces. Some are destined for the chorus, some for a brief, tragic cameo. But you, Detective Cole, the jester feels you have the potential for a much more significant part, perhaps even my understudy." Before I could react, Before I could even process the full horror of Marina's willing damnation and Felix's true, predatory nature, the very air in the chamber grew heavy, charged with an immense ancient power. The thrumming heartbeat intensified, shaking the stones beneath my feet. The phosphorescent fungi pulsed with a violent blood-red light, and from the deepest shadows behind the dais, a figure began to coalesce. It was tall, impossibly thin, draped in a jester's motley of crimson and midnight black, the fabric seeming to writhe and shift as if woven from living shadows. Its face was a stark white mask of grease paint, but the features beneath were fluid, constantly shifting. A leering grin one moment, a rictus of profound sorrow the next, then a silent, open-mouthed scream. Its eyes were burning coals, promising both ecstasy and eternal torment. This was no man in a costume. This was something ancient, something unholy. The Crimson Jester. Its laughter filled the chamber, not a sound of mirth, but a discordant symphony of 1,000 trapped voices. The joyful shrieks of children, the agonized sobs of the dying, the mad cackling of the damned, all woven into one terrifying, overwhelming chorus. It fixed its burning gaze on me, and I felt my sanity begin to fray, my carefully constructed walls of logic and reason crumbling under the weight of its absolute, malevolent presence. Felix Grinwald bowed low, a theatrical flourish. Marina Vale curtsied, her eyes alight with fanatical devotion. "Behold, Detective Cole," Felix intoned, his voice dripping with mock reverence. "The true master of ceremonies, the heart and soul of Moonshade Circus." The Crimson Jester took a slow, deliberate step towards me, its shadow stretching, elongating, like a grasping claw. The show, my personal, horrifying debut, was about to begin. The Crimson Jester's presence was a physical assault. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the coppery scent of blood now intermingled with the cloying sweetness of funereal flowers, and something else, something like burnt ozone and pure, distilled fear. Its burning eyes, ancient and infinitely cruel, bored into me, stripping away pretense, dissecting my deepest terrors. The chorus of trapped souls that formed its laughter clawed at my mind, each individual shriek and sob a testament to its power. A new player enters the grand charade. The jester's voice boomed, though its painted lips did not move. It was a sound that resonated in my bones, 1,000 whispers and shouts converging into articulate, terrifying speech. A man of logic, of cold, hard facts. How delightful. Such material offers the most exquisite breaking point. Felix Grinwald straightened from his bow, his face alight with a sycophantic eagerness. "He is resilient, master, but all masks crack under the right, theatrical direction." Marina, beside him, watched me with an almost cannibalistic curiosity, as if eager to see how I would be unmade. And so, my performance began. It wasn't a choice. It was an imposition. The chamber around us shifted, the stone walls melting away, replaced by the garish painted canvas of the main circus tent, yet impossibly vast, distorted, as if seen through a madman's lens. The spectral audience leaned forward, their empty sockets fixed on me. I was thrust into a series of grotesque parodies of circus acts. One moment I was on a high wire, impossibly thin, stretched over an abyss filled with grasping, shadowy hands, the jester's laughter booming with each imagined slip. The next, I was a reluctant lion tamer, facing not beasts of flesh and blood, but roaring, phantasmal manifestations of my own past failures. The unsolved cases, the faces of victims I couldn't save, their eyes accusing, their voices part of the ano, jestas chorus. Each failure to tame them resulted in a fresh wave of psychic torment, the jester feeding on my despair. Then, a rigged game of chance, 3 ornate skull-adorned cups shuffled by a skeletal hand, one hiding a writhing serpent, the others Oblivion. Choose wisely, detective. The jester's voice mocked. Every choice has a consequence in this theater. My logic, my detective's intuition, was useless against a game where the rules were written by a malevolent god. Through it all, Felix acted as a grotesque stage manager, offering poisoned advice, nudging me towards pre-scripted failures. His earlier weariness replaced by a chilling, almost gleeful participation. Marina danced at the periphery, a gleeful nymph of damnation, sometimes offering a poisoned apple of a clue, sometimes actively trying to trip me into the jester's snares. My mind reeled. The rules. The rules. The my only anchor. Don't sit in seat number 9. That seat, I now understood, was a focal point of concentrated despair, a direct conduit to the jester's deepest well of power. If lions roar, throw raw meat. The spectral lions, my failures. What meat could I offer them? The realization hit me. My guilt, my self-recrimination. By accepting their spectral accusations, by acknowledging the pain, their roars momentarily softened, their forms grew less distinct. It didn't defeat them, but it brought me moments of clarity. If the tarot reader offers you a reading, accept the fate revealed. Eloise, where was she? As if summoned by the thought, her voice, calm and melodic, amidst the jester's cacophony, echoed in my mind, not from anywhere in the illusory tent, but from within. The fool steps willingly into the abyss, for only in chaos can the true path be found. Your fate, detective, is not to be the jester, but to unmask the play. Unmask the play. The words resonated. This was all a performance, albeit a deadly one. The jester fed on belief, on participation in its script. Suddenly, Toad, the hulking groundskeeper, was there, materializing from the shadows at the edge of the illusory stage. He grunted, thrusting something into my hand. A small, crudely carved wooden bird, surprisingly warm to the touch. Then, with a speed that belied his bulk, he pointed towards a specific section of the illusory audience, towards a ghostly figure that seemed more solid, more anguished than the others. The specter of Jenny King's lost lover, the acrobat. Before I could question, Toad was gone, swallowed by the shifting scenery. The jester, sensing a shift, a flicker of defiance, intensified its assault. The illusions grew more potent, the psychic pressure almost unbearable. Felix cackled, urging the jester on. Marina's dance became more frenzied, more predatory. I was faltering. The abyss of seat 9 seemed to whisper my name, promising an end to the torment. Eloise's words, Toad's gesture. The wooden bird clutched in my sweating palm. Fragments of a desperate last-ditch strategy began to form. This wasn't a battle I could win with force, or even logic in the conventional sense. The jester stage was built on its own twisted internal consistency. To break the performance, I had to introduce an unscripted element, a discordant note so profound it would shatter the illusion. "You want a show, jester?" I yelled, my voice raw, a desperate gamble. "You want a grand finale?" I strode towards the section of the spectral audience Toad had indicated, towards the anguished ghost of Jenny's acrobat. "Then let's give them one they'll never forget." This was horrendously risky, interacting directly with one of the cast outside the jester's script. As I approached the ghost, it recoiled, its silent scream intensifying. But I held up the small wooden bird Toad had given me. "He remembers you," I said, my voice projecting, addressing not just the ghost, but the entire grotesque theater. "Jenny remembers you. Your love was real, not a part of this. This lie, a flicker." For a microsecond, the acrobat's spectral form seemed less tormented, a hint of confused recognition in its hollow eyes. The jester shrieked, a sound of nails on a chalkboard, the illusion around us wavering, the colors dimming. Felix looked momentarily stunned. Marina's dance faltered. Love? Sentiment? The jester's voice was laced with contempt, but also a new, faint note of uncertainty. "Such fleeting, fragile things have no place in my eternal masterpiece. They're the only things that are real," I retorted, pressing on. "This circus, your power. It's built on stolen moments, twisted memories. But you can't truly own what was freely given. I looked directly at the jester, channeling every ounce of defiance I possessed. My fate, according to your reader, was to join the cast. And I accept that fate. The jester's form seemed to swell, its grin widening. Felix looked triumphant. Marina clapped her hands with a childlike, malicious glee. "But not as your puppet," I roared. I turned back to the spectral acrobat, holding out the wooden bird. "This is from Jenny, a token of a real life, a real love, outside this prison." I then did the unthinkable. I walked towards the spectral manifestation of Seat 9, the one I've been warned against, the vortex of despair. The jester's laughter boomed, anticipating my fall, but instead of sitting, I placed the small wooden bird carefully onto the phantom seat. I offer this memory, this fragment of true connection, to your abyss, jester. Let your despair try to consume that. The moment the bird touched the seat, an ear-splitting shriek, not of triumph but of agony, tore from the jester. The wooden bird glowed with an intense, pure white light, pushing back against the shadows. The illusion of Seat 9 buckled, cracked, then shattered like black glass. The jester recoiled, its form flickering violently, the chorus of trapped souls in its voice, momentarily dissolving into a cacophony of pained, individual cries. The entire illusory circus shuddered. Felix screamed, clutching his head. Marina stumbled, her painted smile frozen in a mask of confusion and dawning fear. The spectral audience flickered and dimmed. The ghost of the acrobat looked towards the light emanating from the bird, a single spectral tear tracing a path down its cheek, before it began to fade, not into the jester's grasp, but into something calmer. "The script! You've broken the script!" Felix shrieked, his composure shattered, his face aging decades in moments. "The master demands adherence. The master feeds on adherence." I countered, feeling a surge of something other than terror, a desperate, fragile hope. But even an eternal performance needs an audience that chooses to watch. I didn't know if I could destroy the jester, but I had disrupted its play, introduced an element of genuine, uncorrupted emotion. It couldn't process, couldn't control. The understage labyrinth was reasserting itself around us, the grand illusions collapsing into decaying stone and shadow. Felix, now a withered husk of his former self, lunged for me, no longer a ringmaster, but a desperate, cornered animal. "You will pay. You will join us. The show must go on." Marina, seeing her eternal spotlight dimming, turned on me too, her face contorted in a snarl of childish rage. But their attacks were weaker now, their power, so tied to the jester's, waning. The jester itself was still there, a towering shadow of rage and confusion, but its hold felt lessened. The ground beneath my feet, the real stone, felt more solid. I didn't fight them head on. I scrambled back towards the spiraling staircase the way I'd come in. The path was clearer now, the jester's illusions flickering and dying. I burst out of the service door, back into the gray, pre-dawn light of the real world. Behind me, I heard a final, earth-shattering roar of fury from beneath the moonshade grounds, a sound of thwarted godhood, followed by a series of deep, subterranean groans, as if the very foundations of the circus were collapsing in on themselves. I didn't look back. I ran. The Moonshade Circus still stands, or what's left of it. They say it's quieter now. The legend's less potent. Felix Grinwald was never seen again. Marina Valle still listed as missing, though some locals whisper of a ghostly girl in theatrical makeup, seen flitting through the decaying tents on moonless nights, forever searching for her lost audience. I carry the scars, of course. The world feels thinner now, more fragile. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just so, I hear the faint, discordant echo of calliope music, and in my office, tucked away in a locked drawer, is a small, crudely carved wooden bird. It's a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, ruled by the most malevolent of jesters, a single, genuine act, a discordant note of truth, can sometimes be enough to tear a hole in the curtain. The show may always be waiting in the wings. But for now, at least my performance is over. I took my bow, and I walked away. Moonshade Circus holds its terrible secrets in the shadows, guarded by a jester who demands an eternal encore. Detective Cole learned that some cases lead to places where reality is just another act. The rules were a desperate guide through a performance stage for his soul. The show is over, but the laughter lingers. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate curtain call. Eloise's words, Toad's gesture. The wooden bird clutched in my sweating palm. Fragments of a desperate last-ditch strategy began to form. This wasn't a battle I could win with force, or even logic in the conventional sense. The jester stage was built on its own twisted internal consistency. To break the performance, I had to introduce an unscripted element, a discordant note so profound it would shatter the illusion. "You want a show, jester?" I yelled, my voice raw, a desperate gamble. "You want a grand finale?" They say hospitals are places of healing. I say they're places where the veil is thin. Welcome to the Nightshade Clinic, a secret place in Seattle where the patients aren't the only ones fighting for their lives. My name is Emma Voss, a nurse seeking refuge. But I found myself in a place of sterile horror, given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the most unsettling place you've ever worked? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to take the night shift with me, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because in this clinic, the reflections don't always show you what's real. The first shift begins now. I used to think the only ghosts I'd ever see were the ones that haunted the linoleum corridors of the ICU. The silent, trailing specters of grief and failure that followed me home after a lost code blue. That was before I took the nursing job at the Nightshade Clinic. I just after what was nestled discreetly in a sleek, anonymous glass tower in downtown Seattle. It was an opulent, hushed facility where the patients were whispers, anonymous meant for public record, and where survival, I soon learned, depended on 3 utterly insane rules. Always use holy water to sanitize medical equipment after each VIP patient. Check patient pulse with fingers wearing silver rings. When you start craving blood after night shifts, you've been converted. The clinic is a temple of sterile silence. But the polished stainless steel surfaces reflect things that aren't there. Quick, flitting shadows with too many limbs and the wrong angles. The last nurse who held my position, a woman named Sarah, apparently had a moment of carelessness with the 3rd rule. Her locker, still sealed and awaiting clearance, smells faintly, sickeningly, of rust and decay. My first day was a study in jarring contradictions. The clinic itself was a masterpiece of minimalist design, Italian marble, hushed lighting, air that smelled of money and medical-grade ozone. It felt more like a luxury spa than a place of healing. My new superior, Dr. Lena Cross, was equally flawless. She was a charismatic, brilliant anesthesiologist in her mid-30s, with a warm, disarming smile and eyes that seemed to understand the exact weight of the trauma I was running from. "Emma, we're so glad to have you," she'd said, her voice like smooth velvet. "Your record is impeccable. I know the intensity of the ICU can burn anyone out. Here, things are more controlled, more deliberate." She introduced me to the other night shift nurse, Carla Monroe, a woman in her late 40s whose face seemed permanently set in a mask of grim disapproval. Carla's nods were curt, her words clipped. She moved with a brittle efficiency, her eyes never lingering on mine for more than a second. The orientation culminated with the head nurse, a severe woman named Miss Albright, handing me a laminated card. On it were the 3 rules. I laughed, assuming it was some dark, gallows humor prank for the new hire. Miss Albright did not laugh. "These are not suggestions, Miss Voss. They are our clinic-specific infection control protocols. They are absolute. You will follow them without question. Her tone was flat, devoid of emotion, which was somehow more terrifying than an overt threat. Later, a young, friendly medtech named Ethan Patel showed me the ropes of the supply room. He was a welcome island of normalcy in this sea of unnerving professionals. He pointed to a locked cabinet. And that's the, special sterile solution for the VIP instruments, he said, lowering his voice. Dr. Cross's proprietary blend. We are not supposed to ask what's in it. He nervously handed me a small, unmarked glass vial of clear, odorless liquid. Holy water? The thought was so absurd I almost laughed again. But the earnest fear in Ethan's eyes stopped me. My first patient was a senator with an aggressive, unexplained dermatological condition. His skin wept a thin, dark fluid, and his eyes were wide with a silent, primal terror. The procedure was simple. Debridement and application of a clinic-specific unguent. As I was cleaning the stainless steel instruments afterwards, using the solution from the vial as instructed, I felt a scalpel in my hand become suddenly, impossibly, ice cold. The metal seemed to throb with a life of its own. I glanced down, and for a heart-stopping second, the reflection staring back from its polished surface wasn't mine. It was a distorted, elongated face with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched into a silent, agonized scream. I dropped the scalpel with a clatter, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I looked again, it was just my own pale, frightened face looking back. I wrote off the incident with the scalpel as a byproduct of stress and fatigue, a hallucination, a trick of the light. It was easier than confronting the alternative. The next evening, I found a small, velvet-lined box in my new locker. Inside lay a set of 3 simple, unadorned silver rings. A printed note from admin was tucked inside. Per clinic policy, these rings are required uniform for all manual pulse monitoring due to potential interference with our patients' sensitive electronic implants. It was another rule. Another piece of the creeping, illogical puzzle, presented with a bland corporate justification that made my skin crawl. I slid them onto the fingers of my right hand. They felt cool and heavy. My patient assignment for the night included patient #1913, a man named Jonas in a long-term comatose state. His chart was a bizarre, looping narrative of unexplained declines and miraculous resuscitations. His room was at the end of the hall, colder than the others, the air still and heavy. As I approached his bed, I followed the new protocol. I placed my silver-clad fingers on the frail, paper-thin skin of his wrist. The moment the silver made contact, his body went rigid. A violent, shuddering convulsion arched his back off the mattress. His eyes, milky and unfocused moments before, snapped open. They weren't milky anymore. They glowed with a faint but undeniable crimson light, like the embers of a dying fire. His head turned, locking his gaze on me. His lips, dry and cracked, pulled back from his teeth, and a voice that was not his own. A dry, rasping whisper that felt like it was spoken inside my own skull, slithered out. "I can smell the old grief on you," the voice hissed. "He favors that vintage." Then, just as suddenly, the light in his eyes died. His body went slack, and he was comatose again. The only evidence of the event, the frantic, beeping spike on his heart monitor. Shaking, I retreated to the nurse's station. I needed to know who had been here before me, who had quit or been fired from this madhouse. I asked Ethan to help me pull the personnel file for my predecessor, Sarah. "That's a tough one," he whispered, glancing nervously down the hall. "Dr. Cross has those sealed, but he owed me for covering a minor mistake of his earlier, and his curiosity was piqued." He returned 20 minutes later with a tablet, his face pale. "Most of it is locked down, encrypted, but I got the final sign-off sheet." He showed me the screen. Sarah's departure was logged, with a final entry signed by Dr. Lena Cross. The reason for leaving was listed as Resigned due to acute personal health reasons. Exhibited signs of severe anemia and advanced psychological distress. Anemia. The word hung in the air. As I was leaving for the night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. Found something in the deep archives about Sarah. A blood test from her last day. It's weird. The iron count is 0. Not low. 0. Like it was. Erased. Meet me tomorrow before shift. Ethan never made it to our meeting. When I arrived for my shift the next evening, his station was empty. His locker had been cleared out. His nameplate removed. I asked Carla where he was. Patel resigned, she said, without looking up from her charts, her voice flat. Family emergency. Moved back east. The lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed it was an insult. A warning. People who asked too many questions here didn't just get fired. They disappeared. The shift was a grueling 12-hour descent into a quiet, sterile hell. My last patient was a young woman bleeding out from an unspecified post-operative complication. We hung bags of O negative, the rich, crimson fluid a stark banner of life, against her pale skin. As I was documenting the transfusion, I found myself staring at the blood bag. The smell of it, the coppery, metallic tang, suddenly filled my senses, and a strange, gnawing emptiness opened up in my gut. A deep, primal craving. It wasn't just hunger. It was a specific, horrifying thirst. My mouth watered. I felt a visceral urge to tear the bag from its stand. I recoiled, a wave of nausea and self-disgust washing over me. I stumbled to the restroom and splashed cold water on my face, my reflection looking pale and wild-eyed. When you start craving blood, the third rule, the final rule, Sarah's anemia. It wasn't a deficiency, it was a symptom of what? I didn't want to imagine. Panic gave way to a cold resolve. I went to Sarah's old locker, the one that still held the faint, sweetish smell of decay. Using a bent paperclip, I worked the cheap lock until it clicked open. Inside, behind a false panel at the back, was what I was hoping for. A small, leather-bound diary. Its pages were a chronicle of Sarah's descent. The first entries were normal, full of observations about the strange clinic. Then came the fear. She wrote about the silver rings, about a patient whispering things he couldn't possibly know. She wrote about the hunger, the shame, the terror of it. She wrote about her growing suspicion of Dr. Cross, who seemed to watch her with a predatory clinical interest. The last entry was a frantic, terrified scrawl, the pen having torn through the paper in places. Lena knows I know. She watches me. The basement. It's not storage. It's a chapel. To a god of scalpels and blood, she's coming for me. Tucked into the last page was a thin plastic keycard, a sub-level access card. On it, Sarah had scratched a single word with a pin, witness. The blueprints I'd seen online had labeled the sub-level as geothermal maintenance. Sarah's last message insisted it was something else entirely. The elevator ride down to the sub-level was silent and slow, a deliberate heavy descent into the clinic's hidden heart. The doors hissed open not to a maintenance corridor of pipes and machinery, but to a hallway of polished obsidian, cool and silent as a tomb. The air was frigid, carrying the sharp scent of ozone and the faint, coppery tang of old dried blood. This was no geothermal plant. This was a sanctuary, or a slaughterhouse. The hallway opened into a vast, circular chamber. In the center, illuminated by a single, focused surgical lamp, was a room that was a grotesque parody of an operating theater. The walls were lined with stainless steel, but also with shelves holding archaic medical texts, bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. Jars of formaldehyde held preserved organs, each one marked with a strange spiral symbol, and bearing some unnatural tumorous growth. The operating table wasn't steel. It was a massive, polished slab of black obsidian, intricately carved with channels designed for fluid runoff. Fear, cold and sharp, ward with a grim, investigative resolve. Sarah's keycard, I realized, didn't just open the elevator. I found a discreet panel on the wall. A swipe of the card and a section of the wall slid open, revealing a small, dark observation room. Its one-way mirror looking out over the obsidian altar. Inside was a single chair and a bank of monitors. Most were dark, but one was active. A recording. My hand trembled as I pressed play. The grainy black and white security footage showed the theater below. It showed my predecessor, Sarah. She was strapped to the obsidian slab, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it transcended the screen. She looked pale, feral, her body emaciated. She was one of them, converted. Dr. Lena Cross stood over her, but not in her usual pristine lab coat. She wore dark silk surgical robes, embroidered with the same spiral symbol as the jars. Her face, usually so warm and empathetic, was a mask of ecstatic, focused intensity. She was chanting a low, guttural language that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The words themselves feeling sharp and dangerous. As Lena raised a ritualistic-looking scalpel, a swirling column of shadow and black smoke began to coalesce over Sarah's body. It had no definite shape, but I could perceive things within it. Long needle-like limbs shifting planes of scar tissue, and two burning points of red light that I knew, instinctively, were its eyes. Malachar. The footage was silent, but I could almost hear Sarah's final, terrified scream as Lena made the first incision. The dark, shadowy form of the demon seemed to inhale, to feed on the raw agony. Then, the most terrifying thing happened, just as Lena was about to deliver the final fatal cut. She paused. She looked up from her victim, her eyes finding the exact, hidden location of the camera in the observation room. She looked directly at me, a slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. "She had your eyes, Emma," Lena's voice said, crystal clear from the monitor's speaker. I realized the footage wasn't a recording. It was a message left for me, that same stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable. The screen dissolved into static. Behind me, in the darkness of the observation room, I heard the soft metallic click of a locking mechanism engaging. I was trapped. The click of the lock was a death sentence delivered in a whisper. A cold dread, far deeper than simple fear, flooded my veins. The lights in the operating theater below hummed to life, bathing the obsidian slab in a stark, sterile glare. The door to the theater slid open, and Dr. Lena Cross stepped into the room, her movements calm, poised, as if she were about to begin a routine lecture. She looked up at the one-way mirror of my prison, her smile as radiant and predatory as ever. "I was wondering when you'd find your way down here." Her voice, amplified by hidden speakers, filled the small observation room. It was smooth, conversational, a horrifying counterpoint to the monstrous theater below. Curiosity is such a powerful catalyst, isn't it? Almost as powerful as grief. The door to my observation room hissed open behind me. I spun around, my heart seizing, but it was empty. It was an invitation, an ultimatum. An ultimatum, with no other choice, my body moving on a cold, fatalistic autopilot. I walked out of the observation room and down the short flight of stairs into the chapel of flesh. Lena watched my descent, her expression one of supreme satisfaction. "There, that's better. An audience should never be separated from the stage." "What is this, Lena?" I asked, my voice shaking but laced with a cold fury. "What the hell are you doing?" She let out a soft musical laugh. "We are doing what healers have always done, Emma. We are pushing the boundaries of life and death. We are negotiating with the forces that govern them." She gestured to the obsidian slab, to the jars of grotesque specimens, the Asclepions of the flesh. "My order. We believe that biology is merely a text, and with the right catalyst it can be rewritten. Malachar, the entity you saw on the recording, is our scribe." As she spoke the name, the air in the room grew heavy, the temperature plummeting. Shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, to coalesce. Malakar was listening. And the patients? The VIPs? I pressed, trying to keep my focus on her, not on the creeping dread at the edge of my vision. They are the ink, she said simply. Their pain, their fear, their life force. It fuels the scribe. In return, we learn, we achieve. Miracles, regeneration, longevity. Things you couldn't possibly imagine. Then she took a step closer, her smile vanishing, replaced by an expression of intense clinical focus. And that brings us to your fiancé, Alex. My blood ran cold. What about him? He wasn't an accident, Emma, Lena said, her voice dropping to an intimate, conspiratorial whisper. He was my final test for initiation into the inner circle. A perfectly executed potassium chloride injection, masked by the chaos of a code blue you yourself were attending. His heart, so strong, so full of love for you. Malakar found the flavor of that grief. Exquisite. I needed to see if I could create the perfect offering. She tilted her head. And bringing you here so close to the echo of that foundational pain, it has made him very strong. The grief hit me like a physical blow, a raw, explosive agony that ripped a scream from my throat. And the room responded. Drawn by the raw power of my emotion, Malakar began to manifest. It poured from the polished surfaces of the surgical steel. A miasma of black smoke and shifting, scarred flesh. It rose to its full, emaciated height, a towering parody of a surgeon, its burning red eyes fixed on me, its blackened talon-like fingers clicking softly on the tiled floor. From a side door, Carla Monroe appeared, her face a grim, emotionless mask. She held a large syringe filled with a clear, viscous fluid, a powerful sedative. It had been in a trap from the start. Her coldness, her hostility. It was all designed to push me, to guide me down this exact path. Don't fight it, Emma, Lena said calmly, as Malakar took a gliding step towards me. Your grief will make you his most favored instrument. But grief had turned to pure, incandescent rage. They had taken Alex. They had turned my pain into a demonic delicacy. As Malakar reached for me, its touch like freezer burn, I reacted. I grabbed a stainless steel tray of surgical instruments. The silver rings on my fingers scraped against the metal, and I shoved the tray forward into Malakar's chest. It shrieked, a sound of static and tearing flesh, recoiling as if burned. The holy water. I snatched one of the vials from my pocket, the one Ethan had given me, and flung its contents at the demon. The clear liquid sizzled against its shadowy form, which dissolved and writhed in agony. Lena screamed in fury. Carla, now! Carla lunged with the syringe. I dodged, letting her momentum carry her past me, and slammed my elbow into her side. She stumbled, dropping the syringe, which shattered on the floor. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the heaviest instrument I could find, a bone saw, and turned to face Lena. The game was over. The procedure was just beginning. The operating theater became a whirlwind of chaos. Lena, stripped of her calm superiority, fought with a feral, vicious strength. She was fast, but she wasn't a brawler. I was younger, fueled by a righteous fury that bordered on madness. Malakar, wounded by the holy water and silver, flickered at the edges of the room, a screeching, semi-corporeal mass of rage, unable to fully manifest while I held the remnants of the blessed liquid and wore the rings. I managed to corner Carla using a heavy-wheeled IV stand to pin her against a wall. She stared at me with pure, undiluted hatred. You're ruining everything, she hissed. He would have given us eternal life. He'll give you an eternity of this, I snarled, and brought the stand down hard on her shoulder, incapacitating her. Lena saw her acolyte fall, and her eyes narrowed. She lunged, but not at me. She went for a large, red emergency button on the wall. If I can't have you as a willing subject, she spat, I'll dedicate the entire facility, locked down, Heavy steel shutters slammed down over the exits. The clinic was now a hermetically sealed tomb. My only hope was to reverse what she had started. The anchor. Malachar was tied to the clinic, but its strongest tether, its most stable vessel, was Jonas, patient hash 1913. "You can't kill a god, Emma." "Emma?" Lena screamed as I sprinted past her back towards the elevator. "I don't have to," I yelled back over my shoulder. "I just have to evict him." The clinic upstairs was a madhouse. The lockdown had triggered alarms, and the few remaining staff and VIP patients were in a state of panic. Malachar's influence, now unbound and angry, was running rampant. Lights flickered. Equipment sparked. And ghostly, distorted whispers echoed through the halls. I saw Malachar's form flicker in a window, its talons stretching towards me. Before I burst into Jonas' room, he lay there, still, a living conduit for the horror. Lena was right behind me, her face a mask of fury. There was no time for finesse. I grabbed the emergency defibrillator cart, the crash cart. "Clear," I screamed, more to myself than anyone, and slammed the charged paddles onto Jonas' chest. His body arched, a jolt of raw electricity coursing through him. "What are you doing?" Lena shrieked, trying to pull me away. "You'll destabilize the connection. You'll kill the host. That's the idea." I yelled back, cranking the charge to maximum. I grabbed the largest syringe I could find and drew up a massive, life-threatening dose of epinephrine from the cart. This wasn't a resuscitation. This was an exorcism by medicine. I was making the host body too alive, too chaotic, too strong for the parasitic entity to maintain its grip. I slammed the epinephrine into his central line and charged the paddles again. "Get out of him, you son of a bitch." As the second, maximized shock hit Jonas' chest, the room erupted in a flash of blinding crimson light that seemed to emanate from his very cells. A soundless psychic scream tore through the clinic, shattering windows and sending monitors exploding in showers of sparks. Malachar, its shadowy form fully manifested behind Lena, shrieked in agony. It was being violently, brutally ripped from its anchor, its essence sucked back into the now convulsing body of Jonas. A body that was no longer a quiet, compliant vessel, but a raging biological inferno. The feedback loop was catastrophic, a shockwave threw both Lena and me across the room. I hit the far wall, my head cracking against the tile, my vision swimming. Through the haze, I saw Malachar's form collapse in on itself, pulled into Jonas's chest like smoke into a vacuum. The red light in the room died, plunging us into the flickering emergency lighting. The whispers stopped. The unnatural cold vanished. The presence was gone, not destroyed, but contained, trapped. Lena pushed herself up from the floor, her leg bent at an unnatural angle. The power, the ecstatic confidence, was gone from her face, replaced by the raw animal panic of a predator who had suddenly become prey. Her connection to Malachar, her source of power and belief, was severed. She was just a woman now, a brilliant, murderous, fanatic woman in a ruined, blood-spattered room. I rose unsteadily, the bone saw still clutched in my hand. We stared at each other across the wreckage. For a moment I saw Alex's face. The savage, primitive part of me wanted to finish it, to give her the end she had given him. But I wasn't her. I wasn't a butcher in a cult. I was a nurse. My oath had been to save lives. And though I had twisted that oath tonight, I wouldn't shatter it completely. Letting the saw clatter to the floor, I turned my back on her. I smashed the fire alarm box on the wall, its piercing shriek a welcome, mundane sound. I used a chair to break through the sealed door of a fire escape. As I stumbled out into the cold, wet Seattle night, I left her there, injured and alone, for the authorities to find. I left her with the evidence in the basement, with Jonas's impossible medical readings, with the body of Carla Monroe, and with the full, crushing weight of what she had done, now without her dark god to shield her from the consequences. The official story was a mess. The Nightshade Clinic was shut down, its records seized. Lena Cross, due to her wealth and connections, was declared mentally unfit to stand trial after a spectacular raving confession about blood gods and eternal life. She was confined to a high-security psychiatric facility for the criminally insane. The clinic itself was dismissed as the bizarre hub of a delusional, murderous cult. The supernatural element was buried, as it always is. I left Seattle that week. I left nursing. I tried to find a quiet life, a new name, a place where the shadows didn't have too many limbs. Months later, I'm working as a barista in a small, sun-drenched town in Arizona. It's a world away from the rain and steel of Seattle. One afternoon, a woman comes in. She's new to town, she says. A doctor setting up a small, private practice. She's charming, charismatic, with kind eyes and a warm smile. As I hand her the coffee, I notice a small, intricate tattoo peeking out from the cuff of her sleeve. It's a spiral, the same symbol that was carved into the obsidian altar in Nightshade's base. She thanks me, her eyes meeting mine for just a second too long. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she says. "I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of each other." Her name, according to the credit card she uses, is Dr. Helene Archer. An anagram, not of Lena, of Carla. The experiment wasn't destroyed. The cult wasn't just one woman. And they haven't forgotten the nurse with the grief-scented blood who managed to cage their god. They haven't forgotten me. They say Chicago is built on forgotten history. Some of that history is buried deeper than others. Welcome to Evans Station, a place not found on any city map, where the trains don't just run on time. They run on something else entirely. My name is Marcus Tate, a maintenance worker trying to outrun his own ghosts. But I found myself in a place of steel and shadows, given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest abandoned place you've ever explored? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to descend into Evans Station, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because down here, the schedules are absolute. The final departure is boarding now. I used to tell myself the piercing shriek of train wheels on steel was the sound of progress, the sound of Chicago breathing. That was before the derailment. Before that same sound became the punctuation mark at the end of my wife Sarah's life. And before I started hearing her whisper my name in the hollow echo of every passing freight car. Now I'm here, standing at the rusted gates of Evans Station, a place officially bulldozed from city maps since a mass disappearance in '79, hired by a man with a scarred face and a fat roll of cash to find out what happened to the last poor bastard he sent down here. I'll be agent hours, and I would eat him trouble. That's after she said. The air in this subterranean mausoleum is thick with the smell of decay, stagnant water, and burnt ozone. And the only welcome I got was a greasy handwritten note left on a workbench. Don't board trains without numbers on the departure board. If the station bell rings 3 times, place an iron bar on the nearest track. When you hear train whistles from abandoned tunnels, a ghost train is arriving. My missing colleague, Caleb Dunn, was a stickler for rules, but I found his primary toolbox near an unnumbered platform, its contents scattered as if he'd left in a soul-tearing hurry or been dragged away. The job was simple, the man with the scar had said. Get in, restore power to the auxiliary systems for a structural survey, and find out why Caleb stopped answering his phone. The cash was good enough to keep the bank from foreclosing on the empty house Sarah and I once called home. A house now haunted by a silence far louder than any ghost train. I descended the main staircase, my heavy work boots echoing in the cavernous space. Evans Station was a cathedral of decay. Grand archways were choked with cobwebs. Ornate brass fixtures were coated in a verdigris shroud, and the floor was a mosaic of cracked tiles and century-old grime. The silence was a physical entity, so profound that the drip of water from the vaulted ceiling sounded like a gunshot. My first task, the secondary generator in sub-level B. The schematics were old, brittle things that crackled in my hands. The generator room was a cage of rusted machinery and gargantuan switches that looked like they belonged in Frankenstein's laboratory. With a groaning shudder of protest, I threw the main breaker. The station didn't roar to life. It awoke with a low, sick hum. A few emergency lights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like hanged men. And then high above the main concourse, the old Solari split-flap departure board began to chatter. Clack, clack, clack. The sound was a frantic mechanical heartbeat in the dead silence. Letters and numbers spun in a dizzying random cascade of forgotten destinations. Cincinnati, St. Louis, Omaha, before the entire board went dark, save for one track. Track 9. Its destination board didn't list a city. It displayed a single, chilling word, elsewhere. A cold knot tightened in my gut. I looked at the station blueprints spread out on a dusty bench. Track 9 ran straight into a section of tunnel clearly marked with a red ink note from a long-dead city engineer. Tunnel 3? Collapsed 1928. Unstable? Do not enter. And from the absolute, rock-sealed darkness of that very tunnel, a low, mournful train whistle echoed, a sound that vibrated through the concrete floor and up into my bones. It was a sound I knew too well. A phantom cry that tore open old wounds. The first rule. The third rule. They weren't jokes. They were a syllabus for a curriculum of horror. The whistle faded, leaving a silence that felt heavier, more watchful than before. I tried to rationalize it. Air pressure changes in the old tunnels. A trick of acoustics, but my heart hammered a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs, refusing to listen to reason. I turned my attention back to the job, focusing on the tangible, the mechanical. Find Caleb. That was the mission. I started my search in the maintenance corridors, a labyrinth of damp concrete and weeping pipes. That's where I found it. Tucked away in a rusted maintenance locker, beneath a pile of moldy rags, was a smartphone. Caleb's. The screen was cracked, but the battery had a sliver of life left. I powered it on. The only things on it were audio files, a series of frantic, personal logs. Log 1, Caleb's voice, tinny and strained, crackled from the small speaker. Made it in. Place gives me the creeps, but the money's good. First task is the generator. Easy peasy. His voice was confident then. I scrolled forward. Log 4. Power's on. But the board's acting up. Listed a train on track 9. That's impossible. It's a deadline. His voice was less steady now. Log 7, he was whispering now, the sound of his own ragged breathing loud in the recording. A train just arrived. On track 9, no lights, no driver. Just rolled in. The doors opened. I saw people inside, just sitting there, staring out. God, I gotta get out of here. As if on cue, a new sound echoed through the station. Not a whistle, but a low, grinding rumble. I crept to the edge of the main concourse, peering down at the tracks. On track 9, the one leading to nowhere, a train was gliding out of the darkness of the collapsed tunnel. It was a relic, a spectral, rust-eaten passenger train from the 1940s. Its windows were dark, grimy voids. It moved with an unnatural silence. No click-clack of wheels, no screech of brakes. It simply arrived, stopping perfectly at the platform marked elsewhere. It had no identifying numbers on its chassis, no logos, nothing. A numberless train, with a soft, pneumatic sigh that sounded like a dying breath. The doors slid open. The interior was dimly lit by a faint, gray luminescence. And Caleb was right. It was full of passengers. The passengers. They sat perfectly still. Men in old-fashioned hats, women with ghostly veils, all staring forward unblinking. As I watched, one of them, a woman in a tattered blue dress, slowly turned her head. Her face was indistinct, a pale smudge in the gloom, but her movements were horribly, unnervingly deliberate. She looked directly at me, and she beckoned. For a terrifying, irrational moment, I felt a pull. A deep, resonant grief echoing in my chest. She looked, in the dim, deceiving light, a little like Sarah. The urge to walk towards the open door to join her was a physical weight, a siren song of sorrow. I broke eye contact, my heart pounding, and stumbled back into the shadows of the corridor. As I did, the final audio log on Caleb's phone chose that moment to play. His voice a panicked, static-laced whisper. The signals, the power surges. They're not ghosts. They're not random. Someone is controlling them from inside the station. Caleb's last words shifted everything. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a curated event. Someone was the puppet master. I was no longer just a survivor. I was an investigator in a crime scene where the laws of physics were optional. Optional. I began to hunt for the operator, not the ghosts. My engineering knowledge was my only weapon. I followed the power conduits, searching for anomalies, and I found them. Tucked behind a rusted access panel was a bundle of modern, shielded Ethernet cables, starkly new against the crumbling, cloth-wrapped wiring of the 1920s. They snaked off into the deeper, more derelict parts of the station. Someone had jury-rigged a modern network into this corpse of a building. As I was tracing the cables, a new sound shattered the silence. Clang. It was a deep, resonant toll, so powerful it vibrated through my bones and made my teeth ache. An old, cast-iron station bell high on the concourse wall, a bell that shouldn't have been able to ring, swung ponderously. Clang. My eyes darted to the note with the rules, which I'd shoved in my pocket. If the station bell rings 3 times, clang. The third toll echoed, seeming to suck the very air from the station, replacing it with a palpable, predatory cold. Panic seized me. Place an iron bar on the nearest track. I looked around wildly. My eyes landed on a heavy 4-foot iron pry bar leaning against a support column. I grabbed it, its weight a solid, reassuring thing in my trembling hands. I sprinted to the edge of the nearest platform, track 4, and with a grunt of effort, laid the heavy bar across the 2 rails. The moment the iron completed the circuit, Caleb's disembodied voice, a ghostly echo from a nearby power speaker I hadn't even realized was active, crackled through the air. The iron doesn't stop the train, Marcus. It grounds the hunger. As he spoke, a wave of immense, invisible pressure washed through the station. The iron bar I'd just placed began to glow. First a dull cherry red, then a brighter orange, as if it were absorbing an immense, unseen energy, a strange, intricate sigil, like a stylized train wheel crossed with a star, burned itself onto the rusted surface of the rails where the bar made contact. The oppressive cold receded, and the air felt, for a moment, clean, normal. My hands were shaking. I took a photo of the sigil with my phone and sent it, along with a frantic, rambling text about the station's history, to the one person I knew who might be able to make sense of this madness, Dr. Elise Monroe, my strange friend, a forensic psychologist who owed me a favor. Her reply came back almost instantly. Marcus, where are you? That sigil is from 19th century spiritualist folklore. It's not for summoning. It's for containment. Stay put. I'm looking into something. Elise's message was a confirmation of my worst fears. Someone wasn't just observing the ghosts of Evans Station. They were actively tampering with the cage. I followed the path of the new cables, my maglite cutting a nervous path through the oppressive dark, leading me away from the main concourse and into the station's administrative wing, an area that had been rotting since the 70s. The cables terminated at a heavy steel door marked Chief Engineer. It was locked, But the cheap, modern padlock was no match for a pair of bolt cutters from my tool bag. The room inside was a technological parasite, living in the belly of an ancient beast. The air hummed with the sound of cooling fans. Racks of high-end computer servers blinked with malevolent red and green lights. Multiple laptops were open on a makeshift desk, their screens displaying complex audio mixing software, signal routing matrices, and lines of code. And on a large monitor, a live feed from a dozen hidden cameras throughout the station. My station. This was the nest, Raiden Knox's lair. On the desk, amidst a clutter of energy drink cans and junk food wrappers, was a leather-bound journal. His journal. I flipped it open. It was a manifesto, a terrifying chronicle of obsession. He wrote of the conductor, of the Midnight Express. He detailed his experiments in amplifying the station's resonant frequencies to strengthen the connection. He saw himself as a pioneer, a new god of a new religion, with Eben Station as his temple. And then I saw the list. On the last page, under the heading Scheduled Departures, it was a list of names. Caleb Spanner Dunn. His name was crossed out, and below it, the last entry, Marcus Tate, my name. With today's date beside it, my blood ran cold. As I stared at my own name on this psycho's hit list, the power in the room died. The hum of the servers, the glow of the monitors, everything vanished. I was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart hammering against my ribs. I thumbed the switch. The powerful beam cut through the blackness, landing on the reinforced glass window that looked out from the office onto the main tracks. And standing there, on the other side of the glass, not 10 feet away, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly gaunt, dressed in the tattered, soot-blackened remains of a 19th century conductor's uniform. Its face was a rusted iron mask, shaped like an old train lantern, with two glowing hot coals for eyes. It didn't seem to stand on the ground, but hovered just above it. The conductor. It was real. It was staring directly at me. It raised a single gauntleted hand, its long skeletal fingers pointing right at my heart. The station's PA system, dead just a moment before, crackled to life. But it wasn't Caleb's voice this time. It was a new voice, digitally filtered, layered, and filled with a cold, smug amusement. Raiden Knox's voice. "Welcome, Engineer Tate." The voice echoed through the station, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "You are now officially part of the permanent collection. Please have your ticket ready for departure." The conductor's gaze was a physical weight, a cold, crushing pressure that pinned me in place. Its coal-like eyes burned through the reinforced glass, seeing not just me, but the frantic, panicked pulse hammering in my throat. Raiden's disembodied voice echoed through the station, a triumphant, mocking fanfare for my own damnation. My mind raced, scrambling for an escape, but the office had become a cage, the darkness outside a swirling, predatory ocean. Then the chaos began. Raiden, now playing his infernal instrument with a full orchestra, unleashed everything at once. From multiple tunnels, the mournful, piercing whistles of incoming trains screamed in a discordant symphony. The station bell began to toll, not just 3 times, but in a relentless, maddening peal that shook the very foundations of the station, a frantic summons to the abyss. The temperature in the office plummeted, frost spiderwebbing across the inside of the glass where the conductor stood, its presence warping the very air. I had to move. I couldn't fight the phantom, but I could fight the machine. I turned my back on the terrifying visage in the window and shone my light on the server racks. My goal was simple: destroy the nest. I grabbed the heaviest piece of equipment I could find, a hefty, outdated backup power supply, and hefted it, aiming for the main server. Engineer. Raiden's voice chided through the speakers, dripping with condescending amusement. Vandalism of company property is strictly forbidden. Besides, I have fail-safes. As if on cue, the steel door I had broken into slammed shut. A heavy internal deadbolt, likely magnetic, thudding into place with grim finality. I was locked in with the ghost in the machine. Or so he thought. My eyes scanned the room frantically. There had to be another way out. The blueprints. I remembered a small maintenance hatch shown in the corner of the office, leading to an old ventilation shaft. It was there behind a stack of dusty, forgotten filing cabinets. The conductor outside the window began to move. Not walking, but gliding along the platform. Its gaze never leaving me, tracking me as I scrambled towards the hatch. Its movement was accompanied by a low, grinding sound, like immense rusted gears turning for the first time in a century. As I wrestled with the heavy cabinet, Elise's name flashed on my phone screen. I answered, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Marcus. Oh God, Marcus. Listen to me. Her voice was a torrent of panic discovery. I found it. An old newspaper archive from the original boiler explosion in 1893. They interviewed a survivor, a fireman. He talked about the chief engineer, a cruel man named Silas Marner, who refused to sound the evacuation warning. He said Marner was a devil of a man, a real conductor to hell. The article says Marner's body was never found, just his melted iron watch fob, shaped like a lantern. Silas Marner, the conductor. The name felt dangerous, a key that could unlock the wrong kind of door. Elise, I'm trapped, I grunted, finally shoving the cabinet aside to reveal the rusted, bolted hatch. He's here, the conductor, and the psycho running this whole damn show has me locked in. Don't say the name, Marcus. Don't say the name, Marcus, she warned, her voice tight with fear. The folklore says speaking its true name gives it a claim on you. It forges a link. You become its herald. Suddenly, Caleb's voice, a desperate, static-laced whisper, cut through the station's PA system, overriding Raiden's control for a precious second. The vents. Marcus! He can't follow you in the narrow spaces, but he'll send his passengers. Don't listen to their whispers. The warning came just in time. I wrenched the final bolt free and pulled the heavy iron hatch open. The conductor outside shrieked, a sound of tearing metal and escaping steam, and slammed its gauntleted fist against the reinforced glass, which cracked and splintered. It couldn't enter, but its fury was palpable. I squeezed into the ventilation shaft, a dark, claustrophobic tunnel filled with the dust of ages. It was a tight fit, my shoulders scraping against the rusted metal. Behind me, I could hear Raiden's enraged scream of frustration over the PA, followed by a new, horrifying sound, a soft, collective sigh that seemed to come from the very walls of the station. I knew what it was. The passengers. He was sending them after me. I crawled on my hands and knees, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the oppressive darkness. The whispers started almost immediately, faint at first, then clearer, slithering through the vents from all directions. He's waiting for you, Marcus. A woman's voice, achingly familiar, whispered from a grate to my left. It sounded like Sarah. My heart seized. Just one little ride. Then the pain stops. A man wheezed from ahead. We have a seat saved for you. Next to her. They were using my grief, my deepest wound, as a weapon. I gritted my teeth, focusing on Caleb's warning, on the cold, hard reality of the rusted metal beneath my palms. They were echoes. They weren't real. The main shaft opened into a larger vertical duct, a precarious ladder leading down into the station's underbelly, the network of service tunnels beneath the tracks. As I descended, I could see them through the grates, the ghostly, shimmering forms of the passengers, gliding through the main concourse, their faces turned towards the vents, their eyes empty, their mouths whispering my name, trying to lure me out. At the bottom, I found myself in a dripping, labyrinthine tunnel. This was my only chance. I had to get to the source, to the boiler room Elise had mentioned, the site of the original disaster, the place where the conductor was born. It was the heart of the station's power, both literally and figuratively. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that's where Raiden would have to be to channel this much energy. I ran, following the thickest bundles of modern cabling. The station above was a symphony of horrors. I could hear the ghost trains arriving one after another, the bell tolling, and above it all, Raiden's voice, no longer taunting, but commanding, narrating the hunt for his audience of one. The subject is now in the service tunnels, attempting to evade the inevitable, he announced, his voice echoing unnaturally. A futile gesture. The Midnight Express is always on schedule. I rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. Blocking the tunnel ahead was not the conductor, but one of its lieutenants. A passenger, a horribly mangled railway worker from the '79 incident, his body a twisted ruin of flesh and faded uniform. He lunged, his spectral hands reaching for me, a silent scream on his distorted face. I didn't have time to think. I remembered the rule. The iron. I swung my heavy pry bar, the one I'd retrieved after the Bell incident. The iron passed through the ghost's form, and the entity shrieked, dissolving like smoke in the wind. The iron was my only weapon, my only shield. Finally, I saw it. A heavy iron door, a plaque above it reading, Boiler Room No. 1. S. Marner, Chief Engineer. The source. I took a deep breath, gripped the pry bar tightly, and pushed the door open, preparing to face the man behind the curtain. The air that billowed out of the boiler room was thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket of coal dust, superheated steam, and an underlying charnel house sweetness. This was the nexus, the place where the tragedy of 1893 had saturated the very bricks with pain, creating the fertile ground for a monster. And in the center of the cavernous room, amidst the colossal, dormant iron boilers that loomed like sleeping behemoths, was the pulsating, electronic heart of Raiden Knox's operation. He was there, a pale, gangly figure, illuminated by the glow of a dozen monitors. He wasn't cowering or hiding. He was standing with his arms outstretched, head thrown back in ecstasy, basking in the raw spectral energy that swirled visibly in the air around him. Wires and cables snaked from a central server hub, his command console, to the ancient conduits of the station, a parasitic nervous system, head grafted onto the station's corpse. He was conducting the chaos, not with a baton, but with a keyboard and a mixing board, a maestro of a digital science. He turned as I entered, and his face broke into a wide, ecstatic grin. It was the face of a true believer, his eyes dilated, reflecting the flickering data on the screens behind him. "Ah, the guest of honor arrives," he exclaimed, his voice his own now, youthful and jarringly enthusiastic. "Right on schedule. Did you enjoy the welcoming party? I find the passengers add such a wonderful personal touch to the experience." "It's over, kid," I said, my voice a low growl, gripping the iron pry bar so tightly my knuckles were white. "Shut it down," Raiden laughed, a high manic sound that echoed off the iron boilers. "Shut it down. Marcus, you're looking at the dawn of a new era. This isn't a haunting. It's an interactive exhibition, a gateway. I'm not just controlling ghosts. I'm about to monetize the afterlife. And you are my keynote presentation." He gestured to a large screen, which showed a live, thermal imaging view of me and around my figure. A faint, shimmering aura of cold energy was visible. Your grief, your connection to your wife's rail-related tragedy. It makes you a beacon, a 5-star appetizer for the conductor. He's been savoring the prospect of your arrival. As he spoke, he tapped a few keys on his board. The phantom train whistle, The whistle from my nightmares screamed through the room's speakers. It was sharp, visceral, and it hit me like a physical blow. My knees buckled, the image of Sarah's face, pale and terrified, flashing behind my eyes. The pry bar suddenly felt impossibly heavy. See? See? Raiden said, his voice laced with cruel fascination. I've isolated the exact resonant frequency of your trauma. I can play your pain like a violin. He was trying to incapacitate me psychologically, to break me down for the final offering. I fought against it, focusing on the anger, on the cold fury at this pathetic, power-mad child playing with souls. You're just a hacker, Raiden. A kid playing with things you don't understand. I understand perfectly, he shrieked, his composure cracking, revealing the petulant narcissist beneath. I am the new station master, the new conductor, and it's time for the final departure. He slammed his hand down on his keyboard. The lights flickered, the air grew ice cold, and the massive iron door to the boiler room groaned shut behind me. From the deepest shadows between the boilers, a form began to coalesce. The conductor, summoned here to its place of birth, its lantern eyes burning with a focused, hungry intensity. It was coming for me. But this time, I wasn't going to run. I was going to sever the signal. The conductor glided forward, its presence sucking all the warmth from the room. Raiden watched, his face alight with triumphant glee, a showrunner watching his season finale. I knew I couldn't fight the entity. Not here, not in the heart of its power. The iron pry bar might hold it off for a second, but it was a stopgap, not a solution. The only way to stop the puppet was to cut the strings. Look at him, Marcus, Raiden yelled over the grinding sound of the approaching phantom. He's beautiful. He is the perfect synthesis of industrial power and mortal terror. He is my masterpiece. My eyes darted from the approaching demon to Raiden's command console. It was a chaotic web of modern tech and ancient iron. Destroying it might work, but it would take too long. Then I saw it. The main power conduit from the server hub didn't go to a modern circuit breaker. It was jury-rigged directly into the primary control panel of the largest central boiler. The very one whose explosion had created the conductor. Raiden wasn't just drawing power from the station. He was feeding the spectral energy back into his systems, creating a ghastly, self-sustaining loop. I had an idea. A terrible, desperate engineer's idea. Instead of charging the conductor, I ran, dodging its grasping, skeletal hand, and vaulted over a low railing, landing beside Raiden's console. He yelped in surprise, fumbling for a taser he had clipped to his belt. "It's over, Raiden," I yelled, my hands flying across the ancient boiler control panel, ignoring his pathetic attempts to stop me. I wasn't trying to shut it down. I was doing the opposite. I slammed the rusted manual bypass levers, wrenched open the primary coolant valves, and with the iron pry bar smashed the main regulator gauge, forcing the system into a critical runaway state. I wasn't just destroying the servers. I was creating a massive, chaotic feedback loop, a tsunami of raw, primordial energy. "What are you doing?" Raiden screamed, his face a mask of horror as he finally understood. "You're overloading the matrix. You'll sever the connection." "I'm feeding the signal back to the source," I roared, as the old boiler began to shudder and groan, a deep, angry hum building within its iron belly. The conductor stopped its advance, turning its head as if confused. The energy it was drawing from the station was now a wild, uncontrolled torrent. The feedback loop I'd created was a siren call of pure, chaotic power. And it was all being channeled through the one person connected to both the station's grid and the entity's consciousness. "Raiden!" He screamed as the energy hit him. The monitors around him exploded in showers of sparks. Blue, spectral lightning arced from the console, wrapping around his body. He convulsed, his eyes rolling back in his head. The conductor shrieked, a sound of fury and frustration as its puppet master was torn from its control. The raw energy, its connection to Raiden, now absolute, had to go somewhere. It poured into him, ghostly forms, the faces of the passengers, the mangled railway workers, all the souls trapped in the station, swirled around Raiden, a vortex of spiritual agony. He was lifted from the floor, his body contorting, his fashionable clothes seeming to burn away, replaced by the tattered spectral rags of a bygone era. He had wanted to be the new conductor, and the station, in its own terrible way, was granting his wish. "No, please," he whimpered, his voice now distorted, echoing, as if coming from an old phonograph. The conductor glided to him, not as an attacker, but as a warden. It placed a gauntleted hand on Raiden's shoulder, and the young man's form solidified into a shimmering, ghostly parody of itself. He was promoted. He had become the new ticket taker for the Midnight Express. The conductor turned its lantern gaze to me one last time, a look that was not of anger, but of something ancient and chillingly like respect. Before it and its new screaming acolyte were pulled into a shimmering portal of darkness and vanished. The boiler gave one last, shuddering groan, and the power died for good, plunging the station into a final, absolute silence. I got out. I made an anonymous call to the city, reporting a dangerously unstable structure. I didn't mention ghosts or hackers or conductors to hell. Within a month, the entrances to Eben Station were filled with thousands of tons of concrete, entombed for what I hope is forever. I met Elise for coffee in a bright, crowded cafe far from any train tracks. I told her everything. She listened, her face pale, and when I was done, she told me the true name she had found in the archives. Silas Marner. A name I was glad I never had to speak. Life goes on, or so they say. I'm trying to move on. But last night I was waiting for the last train home at a normal, brightly lit CA station downtown. The platform was nearly empty. As the train pulled in, its familiar, modern electronic whistle sounded. But for a fraction of a second, woven deep within the digital chime, I heard it. A faint, static-laced, echoing voice. Raiden Knox's voice. "Now approaching," it whispered. A sound only I could hear elsewhere. I looked at the train's digital destination board. For a split second, it flickered, the name of the next stop dissolving into a single, chilling word. I looked at the handful of tired commuters on the platform with me. None of them had noticed a thing. But I knew. The conductor was dead. But the train is always looking for a new station master, and the Midnight Express now had a much, much wider route. They say churches are sanctuaries. I say some of them are just very good at keeping secrets buried. Welcome to Shadowcross Church in Boston, a place of soaring arches and hushed shadows, where the cleaning supplies aren't just for dust. My name is Clara Evans, and I came here seeking peace, a place to forget. Instead, I found myself living by 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest place you've ever worked? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to step into Shadowcross after midnight, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell. Because here, the light doesn't just shine, it judges. The first cleaning begins now. I came to Shadowcross Church to be closer to God. Or maybe just to be somewhere quiet enough to finally forget him. My sister, Sarah, she vanished 3 years ago, leaving behind nothing but a hole in my life, and her old Bible with a single cryptic passage circled in red ink. Now I sweep the floors of this ancient Boston church, a place where the lingering scent of frankincense and lemon polish can't quite mask a fainter, more persistent odor that clings to the air after midnight. Something coppery and sweet, like old pennies and decay. The head nun, A woman whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles and piety gave me the janitorial job and 3 rules for my spiritual and physical safety. Don't touch the stained glass when red light appears. If you see blood on the altar in the early morning, clean with holy water, not regular water. When you realize you've been working here since last century to atone, welcome to eternal redemption. Welcome to eternal redemption. The last priest, Father Huey, he disappeared a month ago. The Archdiocese says he just walked away, but I found his mop and bucket next to the main chapel's grand stained glass window. The water in the pail stained a deep, brilliant crimson. My life here was a quiet, monastic routine. I was Clara Evans, the janitor, not Dr. Evans, the doctoral candidate who had a breakdown after her sister disappeared and walked away from a promising career in religious history. Here, I was just a ghost in blue coveralls, sweeping away the sins and sorrows of the day. The church was a Gothic giant, all soaring arches and hushed, shadowed corners. It was beautiful, but it was a cold beauty. A watchful one. On my 3rd night, Sister Mariana, the ancient nun who had hired me, shuffled up to me while I was polishing the brass lectern. Her eyes were cloudy with age, but they held a flicker of sharp, unsettling lucidity. "The rules, child," she'd whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "You remember the rules? They are not just words. They are walls. Keep the walls strong." She patted my arm with a hand that was as light and brittle as a bird's wing, then shuffled away, humming a discordant hymn. I dismissed it, as I always did, as the ramblings of a mind lost to time. It was later, during that same shift, that I met him. Aaron Lenz, the electrician. He was working late, he said, upgrading the ancient temperamental wiring. He was quiet, unassuming, with kind eyes and a shy smile. He offered me a sympathetic look. "Tough job, keeping a place this old from falling apart," he said, his voice soft. "Heard about Father Hugh. Such a sad thing. He loved this church. He seemed like a nice man, a welcome spot of normalcy in the suffocating piety of the place." I finished my shift well after midnight. The vast chapel was empty, silent, save for the groaning of old wood. As I was locking the main doors, my gaze was drawn to the magnificent stained glass window that dominated the western wall. It depicted the martyrdom of Saint Sebastian, a symphony of brilliant blues, greens, and golds. But as I watched, a deep arterial red pulsed from the center of the window, bathing the empty pews in a bloody light for a single silent heartbeat. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, leaving only the cool, pale light of the moon. I stood frozen, the coppery scent in the air suddenly, sickeningly strong. I tried to tell myself the red light was a reflection from a passing ambulance, a trick of the tired mind. But the memory of it, visceral and wrong, clung to me all night. The next morning, I arrived just after dawn. The church, cool and silent. As I entered the main sanctuary, I stopped dead. There, on the pristine white marble of the high altar, were 3 dark, viscous stains. They hadn't been there when I'd left. They looked, unmistakably, like fresh blood. My first instinct was to grab my industrial cleaning solution, to erase this violation from the sacred space. But Sister Marianne's strange, rambling voice echoed in my head. Clean with holy water, not regular water. It was insane, but the memory of the red light, the smell. I hesitated, slipping into the sacristy, the small room where the priests prepared for Mass. I found a small vial of holy water. My hands, trained for years in academic skepticism, felt foolish as I sprinkled the clear liquid onto the first stain. It didn't just dilute, it sizzled. A faint, whispering hiss rose from the marble as the dark crimson stain didn't just fade. It evaporated, vanishing into a wisp of foul-smelling vapor, leaving the marble pristine and cold. My blood ran cold with it. This was not a prank. Later that morning, Detective Michael Rowe arrived. He was young for a homicide detective, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing in a no-nonsense demeanor that felt abrasive in the hallowed quiet. He was in charge of Father Hugh's missing persons case. "Clara Evans?" he asked, his gaze analytical. "You were one of the last people to see him, according to the logbook." He questioned me about Father Hugh's habits, his mood. I gave him rote, safe answers, my heart pounding. I said nothing of the light, of the blood. How could I? He mentioned that Father Hugh's office was locked from the inside, with the key still in the lock. A dead end. But I knew these old churches. I knew about the hidden latches and priests' bolts, relics of a time when privacy was paramount. After Rowe left, I went to the priest's office. A moment of searching, and I found it. A small concealed latch within the door frame. I slipped inside. The office was neat, orderly, except for the desk. There, lying open, was Father Hugh's personal journal. I felt a pang of guilt as I began to read, but the feeling was quickly replaced by a growing dread. The priest's elegant script grew more agitated with each entry. He wrote of his unease, of a pervading spiritual sickness in the church. He wrote of his research into the church's finances, specifically a massive, centuries-old endowment from a single benefactor, the Lenz family. The last entry, dated the night he disappeared, was a shaky, terrified scrawl. "The benefactor is the devil. He is not a patron, but a keeper. He speaks to me from the glass. The light is the key. Saint Sebastian's martyrdom. The artist's signature is a lie. It is not a name, it is a map." Father Hugh's words became my obsession. I spent the next day poring over the church's historical archives in the dusty rectory library, cross-referencing parish records with the priest's notes. The Lenz family name was everywhere. For over 150 years, they had been the church's primary benefactors, their money specifically and repeatedly earmarked for the upkeep, preservation, and spiritual integrity of the St. Sebastian stained glass window. It was more than patronage, it was a vigil. Finding some interesting history, I jumped. Aaron Lenz stood in the doorway of the library, holding a dusty wiring schematic. His sudden appearance made my heart leap into my throat. "Just curious about the architecture," I lied, quickly covering my notes. "It's a special place," he said, his quiet smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Lots of secrets." He offered to help me look up the original blueprints, a kind gesture that felt predatory. He steered me towards records of the bell tower, the organ, away from anything related to the chapel's foundation. He was watching me. That night, a storm rolled in over Boston. Thunder rattled the ancient church, and rain lashed against the windows. And in the main chapel, the red light returned. It wasn't a flicker this time. The St. Sebastian window blazed with a brilliant, hellish crimson light, bathing the entire sanctuary in a gory downpour. I stood frozen in the nave, watching as the image in the glass began to change. The figure of the martyred saint, usually depicted with an expression of serene acceptance, seemed to contort. Its face twisted in a silent scream of agony. The arrows piercing its body seemed to melt away, replaced by the flickering, licking shapes of flames. The figure was being burned alive, and the whispers began. "Not from the wind, not from the rain. Not from the rain." They slithered from the glass itself, distorted, reversed Latin phrases from the Book of Revelation, a litany of damnation. I felt a powerful physical pull towards the window, a dizzying, hypnotic urge to walk forward, to press my hand against the glowing crimson glass, to offer something. I fought it, my body trembling, and took a step back, then another, fleeing the chapel. As I reached the narthex, the main entrance hall, I risked a glance back, and I saw him, Aaron Lenz. He was standing in the shadows by the baptismal font, not looking at me, but at the glowing window. And the expression on his face was not one of fear. It was one of rapt, ecstatic, reverent adoration. He was worshipping it. Aaron's look of worship shattered my last doubts. He wasn't just a quiet electrician. He was a part of this. The next morning, I called Detective Rowe. "I know this is going to sound crazy," I began, my voice tight. I told him everything: the Lenz endowment, Aaron's suspicious behavior, the sealed-off records. I left out the whispers and the bleeding altar, sticking to the facts I could prove. To my surprise, he didn't hang up. "Financial motive is still motive, Miss Evans," he said, his tone skeptical but professional. Father Hugh was looking into the endowment. Our electrician, Mr. Lenz, is a direct descendant of the original benefactors. It's thin, but it's a thread. I'll look into it. I turned my attention back to the last, most cryptic clue from Father Hugh's journal. The artist's signature is a lie. It is not a name. It is a map. I spent hours with a pair of binoculars, scanning every inch of the massive stained glass window from the choir loft. Finally, I found it. In the bottom right corner, where an artist's name should be, was a tiny, almost invisible maker's mark, a small shield emblem. But inside the shield wasn't a name. It was an etching, a miniature, simplified floor plan of the church, as it had been originally constructed in the 1800s. And it showed a room, a chamber, directly beneath the main altar, a space that didn't exist on any modern blueprint. The catacombs, how to get in. The main crypt was sealed. As I pondered this, Sister Marianne shuffled by, muttering to herself. "The new saints sleep in the walls," she whispered as she passed me. "But the old saints sleep below the new, under the dust." It was a riddle, but it was the key. In the church's main crypt, behind a newer 20th century memorial plaque dedicated to a series of recent priests prying it loose, I found a dark, gaping hole and a set of steep, stone stairs spiraling down into cold, musty darkness. The catacombs were silent, the air thick and choking with the dust of a forgotten century. I followed the narrow passage until it opened into a hidden, circular chamber. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and my stomach churned. On a simple stone slab in the center of the room lay a skeleton, its bones stark white against the gloom. It was clad in the tattered, rotted remains of a priest's cassock, a ritualistic-looking knife, its hilt carved with the same spiral I'd seen on the Lenz family crest in the archives, was embedded in its ribcage. It was Father Hugh, and he was not alone. The chamber was a mass grave. All around him were dozens of older remains, skeletons piled in the alcoves, all bearing the same marks of ritual sacrifice. This had been going on for a very long time. My light fell upon the far wall. On it, sketched in charcoal with surprising skill, was a portrait of a stern-looking man in 19th century clerical robes. Beneath it, the name Brother Silas. And beside that portrait was another, more recent drawing, a family tree, meticulously rendered, tracing the lineage of the Lenz family. It ended with a single name, written in fresh, bold strokes. Aaron. As my light traced his name, I heard a deep, scraping groan from the tunnel behind me. The heavy stone door was sliding shut, grinding against the floor, plunging me into absolute, suffocating darkness. The sound of the grinding stone door was the sound of my tomb being sealed. Panic, cold and absolute, flared in my chest. I scrambled back, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the damp stone walls, illuminating the silent, accusing grins of the piled skeletons. I was trapped in a mass grave, a secret altar room, with the body of the man I had inadvertently followed to his doom. From the shadows near the door, a soft, familiar voice spoke. and my blood ran cold. I was wondering when you'd find your way down here, Clara. Aaron Lentz stepped into the beam of my flashlight. He was no longer the shy, kind electrician. His face was alight with a calm, zealous fire, his eyes shining with an unnerving intensity. In his hand, he held a knife, a perfect twin to the one buried in Father Hugh's chest. A pity, really, he continued, his voice echoing in the dead space. I was beginning to hope you would understand, that you would see the beauty in it. You killed him, I whispered, my voice a hoarse rasp. All of them. Killed. Aaron tilted his head, a look of genuine confusion on his face. No, I didn't kill them. I offered them. I purified them. He gestured around the charnel room. This is a holy place, Clara. The place where our order began. Where my ancestor first made the pact with our crimson penitent. He walked calmly towards the portrait of Brother Silas. He was a true visionary. He understood that faith is not a passive thing. It requires sacrifice, blood, pain. He offered himself to the church, and in return it made him eternal, a saint of the glass, a holy confessor. He's a demon, Aaron, a monster. He is a reflection. Aaron's voice rose, filled with fanatical passion. He reflects our sins, our doubts, and cleanses us of them. Father Hugh, he was weak. He saw a demon because his faith was riddled with doubt. He had to be purified. Your sister. My heart stopped. What about my sister? Such a tragedy, Aaron said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. She came here, you know, years ago, asking questions just like you, so full of anger at God, such a potent, wonderful doubt. She made a beautiful offering. The penitent was sated for years after her baptism. The rage that filled me was a white-hot, blinding force, eclipsing all fear. He hadn't just killed her. He had consumed her, fed her to his monster. And now, Aaron said, his eyes gleaming, he is hungry again. And you, Clara, with your academic's mind, your historian's skepticism, you are a feast. But I won't just offer you. I will convert you. You will be my new high priestess. You will see the truth, and you will join me in the sacred work. As he spoke, the very air in the catacombs grew thick and heavy. A deep red light began to bleed through the cracks in the ceiling from the chapel above, casting the bone-filled room in a hellish, crimsoned glow. The whispers started, no longer faint, but a clear, sibilant chorus of reversed Latin, seeming to come from the very stones around us. Malakar, the crimson penitent, was here. Aaron Lung. I dodged. Years of grief transmuting into pure survivalist adrenaline. The catacombs became our arena. He was stronger, armed, but I was faster, fueled by a fury he had so cruelly stoked. I used the environment, kicking up dust to blind him, using the uneven ground to my advantage. Up above, I could hear a faint, distant banging. Row! He'd come, but he was too far away. I scrambled past Aaron, back towards the sealed door, and fumbled in my pocket. The holy water. I threw the contents of the vial at the stone door, not at Aaron. It sizzled against the stone, and the whispers in the room momentarily faltered, screeching as if in pain. The holy water wasn't just for cleaning. It was a barrier, a weapon against the unholy influence seeping through the rock. It bought me a precious second. I saw the ancient, rusted lever for the door mechanism, and threw all my weight against it. With a groan of protesting metal, the stone door began to grind open. I burst out of the catacombs and into the main church, gasping for air that wasn't thick with the dust of the dead. But I hadn't escaped. I had only moved to a larger cage. The entire chapel was bathed in the blinding, blood-red light of the St. Sebastian window. The whispers were a deafening roar, a vortex of damning scripture. The shadows themselves seemed to writhe and stretch, coalescing into long, grasping tendrils. Detective Rowe was there, near the main entrance, his service weapon drawn, his face a mask of pale, horrified disbelief as he stared at the impossible light, unable to process the supernatural chaos he had walked into. Aaron emerged from the crypt behind me, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury. "You cannot deny him his sacrament," he screamed, his voice unnaturally deep, layered with the hissing whispers of the penitent. He was no longer just Aaron. The entity was pouring its power into him, using him as its physical avatar. He charged, moving with an inhuman speed and strength. I dodged behind a heavy oak pew, my mind racing. I couldn't fight him, not when he was channeling the penitent's power. "Clara!" Rowie yelled, taking a few hesitant steps forward. "What is going on?" "Don't let him get to the window," I screamed back. Aaron, ignoring Rowe, turned his gaze to the magnificent, terrifying window. "Oh, my saint, my penitent!" he cried, his arms outstretched. "I've brought you a doubter, but she is strong. Grant me your strength. Let me be your vessel. Let me show her the glory of your baptism." He was offering himself, trying to become a living conduit, a monster of flesh and shadow to destroy me. I remembered Sister Marianne's words, a fragment of her rambling that suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. He feeds on the sinner's pride, child, on the doubter's fear, but the faith of a mustard seed. That is a bitter pill for a demon to swallow. It was a test of faith, a theological battleground. The penitent was a creature born of heretical, twisted dogma. It preyed on sin, on guilt, on doubt. It expected fear and defiance. It couldn't comprehend, couldn't process. Pure, unadulterated faith. It was my only weapon, my only chance. Aaron, his body now wreathed in flickering red shadows, cornered me before the great window, the source of all the horror. He was a nightmare made manifest, his eyes glowing with the penitent's crimson light. "Your final confession, Clara," he hissed, his voice a chorus of damned souls. "Confess your doubt. Confess your anger at the God who took your sister. Give it to him. Give him your pain." He wanted to break me, to make my soul a perfect, tainted offering. I looked past him, at the burning, tormented figure in the glass, at the vortex of malice and pain that had consumed my sister and Father Hugh, and in that moment, facing an absolute, undeniable evil, something shifted inside me. The years of academic skepticism, of anger, of hollow, aching grief, they didn't matter. There, in the belly of the beast, I found it, a single, tiny, desperate ember of the faith. I thought I had lost forever. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I dropped to my knees on the cold stone floor. Aaron laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound. "Yes, kneel before your new God. Yes, kneel before your new God." But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the window, and I began to pray. Not a prayer of fear or supplication. I recited the only one that mattered, the one Sarah had circled in her Bible all those years ago, the 23rd Psalm. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want," I began, my voice trembling but clear, each word a small stone thrown against a tidal wave of malice. The effect was instantaneous. Aaron and the entity within him flinched as if struck. The red light from the window wavered. The whispers faltered, replaced by a sound of confused hissing. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," I continued, my voice growing stronger, fueled by a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." My faith, pure and simple, was anathema. It was a language the penitent couldn't comprehend. It was a discordant holy note in its symphony of damnation. It could not feed on this. It choked on it. The entity, in its agony and confusion, turned its full, terrible power on the only available vessel, still tainted with the glorious sins of pride and murder. Its own keeper. No! Aaron screamed, his own voice breaking through the chorus. She is the offering, not me. I am your servant. The stained glass window behind him did not just shatter. It imploded, a vortex of razor-sharp, blood-red glass and screaming black shadow. The entity denied its intended victim, consumed its veiled acolyte. Aaron was lifted from the floor, his body dissolving, shredding, as he was pulled into the whirlwind. He screamed as his form was absorbed into the window, not as a reflection, but as a new, permanent figure in the pain. A tiny, screaming man, forever trapped in the fires of martyrdom, beside the crimson penitent. The red light vanished, the whispers stopped. A torrent of normal glass, now just blue and green and gold, rained down onto the altar, leaving a gaping, dark hole in the church wall where the window had been. Detective Rowe found me there, kneeling amidst the glittering shards, shaken but alive. The official story became the one the world could accept. Aaron Lenz, the disturbed descendant of a local family, was the leader of a deranged, murderous cult. He had killed Father Hugh and others over the years, and died during a final, violent confrontation with his last intended victim, causing massive damage to the historic church. Shadowcross was deconsecrated, its doors chained, the great window frame bricked up and plastered over, its secret entombed. I finished my doctorate. I found my purpose, not in quiet archives, but out in the world, consulting with law enforcement, helping them understand the twisted logic of cults and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. I carry the grief for my sister not as a wound, but as a shield. But last week, Rose sent me a file for a new case, a series of strange disappearances centered around an old historic library in Philadelphia. He sent a photo of the main reading room. It was dominated by a huge, beautiful stained glass window, depicting the weighing of souls on Judgment Day. It was a different artist, a different city, a different century. But I zoomed in on the photo, my breath catching in my throat. In the bottom corner, almost invisible to the naked eye, was the same tiny, shielded maker's mark. And in the crowd of souls awaiting judgment in the glass, I could have sworn I saw a new, minuscule figure, a man with a familiar, quiet face, holding a set of electrician's tools, his eyes wide with reverent, ecstatic horror. The order had more than one saint. The rot had spread, and my work, I knew with a chilling certainty, was far from over.